What is the fastest way you've seen someone ruin their life? A former acquaintance was playing around with a homemade crossbow that I'd helped him with. I was massively into archery and fletching, and he seemed serious about it. I typically made him leave it with me because deadly weapon. I have an explanation. He kinda didn't. Anyway, to convince his parents to let him join an archery club, he wanted to show off the crossbow we made. I thought it was a decent plan, so let him take it without any ammo. Turns out he was gaming me to get more playtime with his favorite toy. Had gotten hold of some bolts and was effing around shooting his shed a fair bit. He somehow ended up firing a bolt that missed the shed completely, passed between the slats on his fence and hit his neighbor's daughter in the spine. She hasn't walked since. He got effed up real bad by her unstable older brother. They both did jail time. Acquaintance was disowned and ended up homeless, and now I'm not sure where they are in life. Edit. I've had a few people comment that even a stable person would want to F up someone for something like this. Truth told, I half agree. I still feel like it's important information to the situation. However, and just want to qualify the statement, the beating he got was brutal. It involved a crowbar, and it left him with a broken femur. The difference between wanting to do something like that and actually acting on it is also important. Also, we were 18 at the time, the girl was 12, and her brother was 21 for those asking. Edit 2. The brother had a history of anger management issues and drug abuse, and a small list of prior misdemeanors. This man isn't someone you should be elevating just because his negativity was concentrated on someone who you say deserved it. I'm not here to argue about the ethics of his actions or whether or not his instability was a factor in his reaction. It was. Stable people don't find revelry in inflicting grievous bodily harm on others. Two wrongs, eye for an eye, and all that. Story 2. I had a friend years back, always kind of an odd guy, but he had a good heart. Anyway, one day I was hanging out with him and a few other friends, and he told us he was going to get a tattoo tomorrow and had this super cool idea. But he wouldn't tell us what it was because he wanted it to be a surprise. We saw him about a week later. He had tattooed 3/4 of his face green. Like, no design or anything, just solid dark forest green. Basically, he just left the top right quarter of his face normal and the rest was all green. He had been immediately fired from his job the day after getting the tattoo. I kind of lost touch with him shortly after that since he moved to another city. I heard he wound up living in his car. No idea why he did what he did. He had a very good job in IT. At a pretty big company, it was making decent money. No clue why he thought permanently turning 3/4 of his face green would be super awesome. Edit. Okay, my inbox kind of exploded overnight. I have no idea why he got fired. It was about 15 years ago and the company he worked for seemed pretty stuffy. For all I know, maybe he actually quit and just told us he got fired. Maybe he'd gone in and did something crazy or inappropriate that he neglected to mention. No clue. As for the tattoo artist, I have no idea who did it. Again, for all I know, he paid some idiot to do it. I don't have any tattoos myself, so I'm not really an expert on the topic to begin with. I've got to think there are some unscrupulous artists out there who don't give a crap as long as they're getting paid, though. Smokin'! Story 3. I had a few friends who would put more time into WoW or other games than work, school, and homework. One of my friends was very smart and hardworking, but had a sort of bad home life, and I guess games were an escape from that. He got held back in his last year of high school and ended up joining the military instead of being able to afford college. Now he has PTSD and pushed everyone who ever cared about him away. Not a ruined life in a minute story, but gaming can be a very serious addiction. I think what makes it insidious is the illusion of accomplishment and progression. When things aren't going well and you feel like a loser in your own life, you can play a video game and feel like a winner. Video games are designed to be challenging but ultimately fair and doable. Real life isn't really like that, so it makes them more appealing. Now everyone will use one media or another or many as an escape. Books, movies, TV, etc. But only video games really make you feel like you are winning and doing better at life when you play them. You may get caught up with a fictional character and feel a sort of secondhand catharsis when they do something like finally beat a bad guy or whatever. But in a video game, it really is you that's besting a challenge. Just not one with real-life consequences. Everyone needs this sense of accomplishment, but if you get it from video games, you tend not to seek it out as much in real life. Think of it like a Skinner box experiment. One button always gives you a reward. The other button sometimes does. You're just going to keep pushing the one that always works. Psychologically, absolutely true. However, there are some outliers like my friend who might just be the worst Rocket League player of all time, but keeps coming back more and more for more pain. He's like a masochist. There's no reward. He's not winning any games. He has broken a lot of TVs though. Story 4. One of my best childhood friends also died this way, but a bit more slowly. We hung out nearly every weekend from 2nd grade until ninth. In ninth grade, he really started to struggle with his image and identity. He had always been this class clown, but never really one of the cool kids. One day he showed up decked out in skater gear from PacSun and became friends with some junkies. He started using and I stopped hanging out with him. A couple years later, we reconnected. He had convinced everybody that he had beaten the addiction and was moving on with his life. During our college years, I went to a university about 45 minutes away and he started taking classes at a local community college. We would hang out on weekends, sometimes whenever I was in town. 7 years later, he was still going to the community college and was perpetually 1 or 2 classes away from finally graduating. I ended up joining the Navy. A few years later, I got a call that he had died in his sleep from a blood vessel burst in his brain. Apparently, long-time drug use sometimes results in such problems. Doctors discovered he had been using. Even though he could never get his crap together, he was actually a remarkably smart and genuinely interesting person. I never bothered him about his lack of ambition because I figured he was off of drugs and that was good enough. Now I'm pretty much middle-aged and I still miss him. Story 5. In the Air Force, this new guy joins and goes out to the bar, then decides to drive home. Gets a DUI, loses all his rank, and has to pay a ton in fines, but leadership fought for him and he was allowed to stay in the Air Force. 2 months later, as he's paying tons of lawyer and legal fees, he does something really stupid. Drives home from the same bar, drunk again, and gets arrested. Loses his license and gets kicked out of the military. So he loses all his income while he's thousands of dollars in debt. That's not even the worst part. A few months later, he celebrates being a civilian again by, you guessed it, going to the same bar, then driving home again, drunk again. Arrested and put in jail for a while. I can't imagine he has many future career opportunities with less than honorable discharge and an arrest record. Edit. I should have added that the third DUI included charges for driving without a license since he had it suspended after the second. Story 6. I had an acquaintance who was pretty successful. Early 30s, good job, homeowner, etc. His next-door neighbors had custody of their niece, a 16-year-old cheerleader who was home alone all the time. They struck up a friendship. Need I say more? Actually, yes. The cops stop him randomly with her in the passenger seat. They ID her since she looks young. Call her guardians who deny that he has permission to take her anywhere. Here's the thing, they had crossed a county line. Boom. Kidnapping charge. They break him in interrogation and he admits to relations with her. Boom. Statutory SA charges. They convince him to unlock his phone and find her naked in his inbox. Boom. CP charges. Boom. Goes the cell door. Story 7. High school acquaintances were partying underage and some other kids with drama were buzzing the party in some stupid loud car. Drunk guy thinks the best way to handle this is to throw a huge paving stone at the car at one of its passes. Stone goes through the window, hits the passenger, mid-body, lap, not the head, but the driver panics and refuses to take passenger to the hospital. Apparently, everybody was under the influence. She bled out of internal injuries in the hours that followed. Guy who threw the stone is still in prison for manslaughter. ETA, sorry, well, here are some answers to the best of my ability. No charges against the driver, sorry. Yes, still in jail. From all the reports, was trying to mess up car, not people, doesn't excuse it, just a detail about intent. Also, I should have maybe rephrased how I know of these people. We were in high school age when we met briefly, not I knew them from my own high school. Story 8. I just witnessed an 18-year-old kid that nearly killed his 5 14 to 17-year-old friends going 70 plus miles per hour running from a cop after fleeing an illegal burn. The driver lost control and crashed the car. The driver seemed to lack any remorse in the way he spoke of the event, but also had no idea that we had to resuscitate 2 of his friends halfway to the hospital. Initially, he was heard stating that his charges would be dropped due to his age, but I hope that changed as he learned the condition of his friends. From boozy Friday night party to near-life ending mistake in a matter of minutes, all the kids are healing well. Edited to add clarification on illegal burn. We can't have bonfires because COVID destroyed firefighting resources and we simply cannot risk it. Also, I don't know how cops press charges, but they are involved in it in some way. Sorry, I don't know how that system works. I just put the band-aids on when you get hurt. Edited again to add, as this has gained some traction, I would like to add that it was not my intent to imply that I wished the most extreme or most lax justice on this kid. I'm not the judge nor the jury. That's not my call. I simply put the band-aids on injured people. Part of my oath as an EMT is to provide unbiased care to all people that I serve regardless of the situation. However, I am still human and must cope with intense and awful emotions from time to time from the nature of my work. This call hurt me, and perhaps that can be seen in the words I initially chose. Venting those emotions and resulting frustrations on sources like Reddit genuinely helps me cope with the things I see and do, as it is an easy way to throw out anger to a vague source rather than harbor it and let it change me. However, it is always my highest priority to provide genuine compassion to all my patients in person, regardless of their role in the tragedy. I do believe there are worthy consequences for the driver's choices, but I also believe that all of the patients in that car were somebody's babies, and I think it is important to act on the latter belief as often as possible. We need more love in this world, especially now, and if for no other reason, selfishly, to remind me how important it is to always strive to be kind even when I'm hurt. Thanks for reading. Story 9. I was a licensed firearms owner in Canada, and I sold a handful of handguns to my dealer when I was still smoking a few years back, and it caught up to me 3 years after I got sober. I'm going to court for sentencing in a couple of months, with the prosecutor seeking 6 to 8 years. And although it may not seem like that much in the grand scheme of things, but since I quit smoking, I got my driver's license, started my own construction business, and I'm in a 4-year relationship with an amazing woman who was the reason for my getting sober. All of that is going to be gone, and my grandpa, who is the only family who raised me that I have left, will most likely be gone because of him being 84. I'm not sure where you would count the life being ruined: the second I made the decision to sell the firearms, the second the RCMP and local police pulled me over with 20 cars in morning rush hour, my name being put in the newspaper with my crime, or when I get sentenced in a few months. I've decided it was the second I made the decision. Story 10. I knew this guy in my 20s. He was kind of new to our little group. He brought this girl around. She was trying to F everybody. I didn't know him that well, but I tried to tell him about her. He didn't believe me and took her side. We stopped talking. When she was trying to F me one night, she told me he had a premature problem and was really lame in bed. She specified she really needed some good chicken because he seriously only lasts like a minute or two. I wasn't interested in her and politely declined. Anyway, I didn't actually see it, but a few months later I heard he got her pregnant. That's the fastest I know of someone ruining their life in about a minute or two. Edit. To answer some of your questions, that happened. It was about 10 years ago. He cut our whole group off so nobody knows any details. I suspect it's 50-50 whether it was his or not, but I'll probably never know. Story 11. It helps to be insane. I say that as someone who is certifiably bonkers. I worked with an engineer at a manufacturing facility at one point in my career. We'll call him Bob Dobbs. We had defense-related contracts with major players like Boeing. It was not this man's job to design anything, but to do manufacturing crap. At some point within a year of my arriving, he began answering the phone with customers as Bob Dobbs, engineering manager, and insisting that all communication go through him. He got away with this for nearly 3 months, until someone called the actual engineering manager asking for Bob Dobbs, the engineering manager, due in no small part to the what the effery involved. A review of Bob Dobbs' work began. He had been redesigning/optimizing customer designs before they went to production. There was almost 1 million of scrap sitting on the shop floor. He was terminated and began a career delivering pizza. Story 12. Worked in the German social welfare system, aka Sozialarbeiter im Sozialamt. No shot. A client of mine said he thinks that my calculations would be wrong after his wife left him because he got not enough money. I asked him if he had any expenses I didn't know of. He was sure he gave me all infos. I asked him to bring me all his invoices, vouchers, receipts, etc., which he did a few days later. I read all his papers and found a payslip that I didn't know of. According to my files, he got social welfare at this time, and I had no info that he had a job with income, which would be social welfare fraud. I kept reading, and I found a so-called Versicherungspolice, an insurance policy for a 5er BMW. You should know that back in the day, a car was a salvageable capital, aka he had to have his car sold to use that money for groceries, etc. It was the mid-90s, it's different now. Then I found the purchase contract for the car, expensive and with installment payments. Then I found the contract with the bank that gave him the loan for the car. So I called the bank and asked them why the heck they are giving a loan that big to an unemployed social welfare recipient. The woman from the bank began to panic because that's new information to her. And while she was trying to explain what happened, the loan had burst because my client didn't pay. I figured out that something is wrong with the payslip. You should know that in Germany, the 4-digit postal code, including the sub-local code like 1000 Berlin 44, was changed to a 5-digit postal code, 12345 Berlin, in 1993. The payslip was from 1995, but the postal code on that thing was from 1993. He forged the payslip to get a loan to get the car because his wife told him he needed a better car to keep her. So he did all this, but the bubble burst because he couldn't afford to pay the installments. And just because he asked me to recalculate him and brought all his info without sorting them out properly, I was able to prove that he committed some felonies. Which, by the way, doesn't mean that he ends up in jail or that he gets arrested. He told me the story. I said what I have to do now and what might happen in the next few weeks. Both have been charged and convicted of social welfare fraud, insurance fraud, falsification of documents, and sneaking bank loans using fake income information. Sorry about the German, guys. I tried my best, okay? I Googled it. It's tough. Story 13. A guy I went to high school with thought he'd make good bank selling in his medical dexamphetamines to other kids in school, no matter what the age. He used to say, "Dad says ADHD is quack science, but Mom gets them for me anyway, so whatever." One of the local gangs found out he was dealing on the sly in their turf. He saved himself from a hospital trip by agreeing to deal for them and help mule stuff into the local federal prison. He thought he could get away with it because his father was a CO there. He forgot he lived in a small town and some local he supplied there eventually ratted him out to save themselves. Idiot's son was charged and caught a 10-year sentence. Didn't matter that he was 17, he was done for. Father barely saved his job after it was confirmed that he was innocent and not involved. Was very lucky to hush up the whole thing with the union behind him. Son was disowned, we're all to blame, and is a pariah dog now to anyone who ever knew him. Story 14. Was dating a girl whose little sister got knocked up when she was around 17, 6 months pregnant, drinking straight vodka at a family party. I pointed it out to my then girlfriend. Family did nothing. Mother didn't care, didn't want to smell the bottle of water, and said it was a lie. Baby mama trapped some guy with that "you're the father" speech around 8 months of pregnancy. I, behind the scene, paid for a DNA test for him. The baby wasn't his. He mentally broke as soon as he heard it. Baby mama didn't care, laughed it off. She was just trying to nail down someone with the job. She has no clue who the father was. Baby was born with a bad type of fetal alcohol syndrome. She's 10 now, severely disabled, and the grandmother takes care of her. Baby mama is still doing hard drugs and passes out birthday BJs. Many lives ruined. The one that sticks out the most was the guy who was supposedly the father. Watched joy disappear from one second to the next in his eyes. The rest don't care, and it's sickening. This statement is brought to you by Trojan, or, just being mindful with who you sleep around with. There's some crazy people out there. Story 15. My ex cheated on me with a mentally unstable woman. He lied about working late one night to go hook up with her. She got mad at him and punished him by filing false essay charges. He was pulled over and hauled to jail 2 blocks from her apartment. He was locked up in an offender unit of one of the worst county jails in the country over Christmas. The case never went to trial. The grand jury no-billed him for lack of evidence of a crime. But he ended up losing me, losing his affair partner, losing his job, losing his volunteer work, losing his side job, losing his savings account, ruining his credit, losing visitation with his daughters from a previous relationship, losing his car, most of his friends, several family relationships, and wound up living with his mom. He also still has the arrest record because he can't afford to have it expunged. So it shows up on every background check. It was like 4 hours between the time he called me to say he was working late and when the cops pulled him over and arrested him. In 4 hours, he completely destroyed his life. Story 16. My sister's husband. First, this guy was completely worthless and a liar. You know how you can meet someone and instantly know just by looking in his face that he's scum? Yeah, that was him when I first met him. My sister moved in with him, got pregnant from him, and married him. Almost 3 years ago, they were still married and raising 2 daughters. They got evicted, but managed to somehow find a new place to move into. Amazing given how most apartments will not rent to you if you've ever been evicted, and within 3 months they were getting evicted again. Now, he had a job when they were dating. At this point, their oldest daughter is 15 years old, almost 16, and she has no memory of her dad ever having a job. His solution to avoiding eviction was to tell my sister to call everyone in her phone's contact list and beg for money, while he did some black tar and got drunk. That explains why they had no money for rent. She called our stepbrother's wife, a woman who makes well into the 6 figures. She could loan you $5,000 faster than a payday loan company. She and I get along great, but I'd never ask her for money. We aren't close enough for that, even though she probably would be willing. Anyways, she was willing to give them the money. No strings, no need to pay it back. Our stepmom told her not to do it. They are in a mess because of their bad choices and let them figure out the solution on their own. Then stepmom called me and told me about my sister begging for money and not to loan 1 cent. I bailed my sister out of jail the year before, and she didn't believe that she should pay me back the bail money. I learned then not to give my sister any money. 2 hours later, I was visiting the ER to see my sister. When the family refused to bail my sister and her family out of their situation, my sister's husband snapped. He beat my sister, choked her until she passed out. My sister says that she believed she was going to die at that point, put her nose in his mouth and ripped one nostril off of her face. When the 15-year-old daughter saw this, she grabbed a sword and was going to kill him. He knocked the sword from her and chokeslammed her into the ground. He was arrested while yelling angrily and asking for anyone to kill him. He remained in jail until his trial. No one bailed him out. Some were willing to until they learned what he did. Then they decided that he was best left behind bars. The state of Texas wanted 25 years for the savage, almost animalistic attack on my sister, as well as the attack on the daughter, his daughter. Since he had no prior arrest, he was sentenced to 6 months in a boot camp, a program followed by parole upon successful completion of the program. He was also ordered to go through alcohol and drug counseling as well as anger management, restraining order against him from my sister and their kids, double felon, assault on his wife, assaulting a minor, who can't own any form of weapon, on probation for like 10 years, where if he F's up, he can get his parole taken away and go back for the full 25 years. Not only can he not own a weapon, but there's a random drug and alcohol testing. He has to pay for the testing, his monthly PO visits, and pay child support as well as restitution on top of monthly bills such as rent and utilities. Every so often I search his name to see what pops up. He's been arrested a few more times. One was over the course of Thanksgiving, first year after he completed the program, and last year he was picked up for public intoxication and giving the arresting officer a false name. He hasn't paid any money in child support, nor has he made any effort to see. He is allowed chaperone visitation or even contact them. Direct contact is not allowed, but they can go through lawyers. Story 17. I am friends with a guy and through him knew his younger sister. Smart, pretty cool. She was doing well in college. Meets a guy and decided to get married after a few weeks without telling anyone. So she moves in with him, and all of a sudden he has too much back pain to work, so she's trying to take classes and support them both. He lays around all day smoking, which she buys for his pain, while she does school and waits tables all night. She also likes to party with him. It's revealed they've both been doing a lot of different drugs. She, of course, drops out of college, a few credits just short of graduating. By this point, her parents and friends are begging her to come to her senses and take their help and go back and finish college. Invite both of them to move in and do all the drugs they want as long as she just finishes school. Her and her husband decide the student loans plus both his and her car loans are too much, so they park the cars at the bank with notes on the windshield that they do not want them anymore and disappeared. They left a note for her parents that they were moving out west or to Mexico and haven't been heard from in over 15 years. My friend heard rumors that the guy was pimping his sister out at one point, but that was after they left that he heard. Too late to do anything. About 5 years ago, he told me he thinks she's probably dead, but the parents are expecting her to come back any day now. The parents used to be pretty joyous people, but that's gone. Edit. Since this is blowing up, there's more context. She loved her parents so much and didn't want to go away to college. She commuted to a university in the city. She was a junior when she met him. We smoked all the time and she always looked down on us for doing it. So her doing all that all of a sudden was really shocking. The family wasn't very religious, but the husband got her obsessed with the book of Revelations. And one of the interactions I had with her as we were all high, she told me that the world was ending soon and I needed to read Revelations. They disappeared on purpose to get out of all the loan debt. It's believed that they changed identities. There's some confusion amongst the friend group if the guy was Mormon or not, but my closest friend is convinced she's living in a fundamentalist Mormon cult in northern Mexico, which he says is a thing. I agree with the brother that they both probably got into harder drugs and she's dead. There's addiction problems in the family, and she went from not drinking or anything to doing all the drugs in the world. And moving away from family to pursue drugs is classic addict behavior. Story 18. I work at a shelter. We had this one kid living with us. His parents abandoned him when he was 6, so the people and kids living and working at the shelter were all the family he had. In the months before his 18th birthday, he made some serious debt. So we gave him the chance to stay longer with us to pay everything off before moving out. But this guy was kinda stupid, and so on the day of his 18th birthday, he signed a lease for a flat, where he lived together with the girlfriend and kids of an older friend, against all of our advice. At least he got a caretaker for his finances, so we thought things might eventually turn out okay. But we were wrong. He ignored the caretaker's calls, threw a party where he gave strong alcohol to minors and got kicked out. Then he lost his job. Then the friend who took him in after said party kicked him out. And he is still in debt without work or a home, just because he thought he was smart and didn't want to live under our rules once he turned 18. Story 19. I had a friend, my old and first best friend in middle school. We were closer than my actual brother, and same for him. He was without a doubt my rock, and I was his. He was a very, very good and talented marching drummer and drummer in general. The dude was learning college licks and rudiments top tier in literal hours. It was effing insane. He got to play with UCLA and USC's drumline at 14 and didn't miss a beat with them. His mom unfortunately passed when he was 15, and he turned to heavy drugs, insane amounts of drinking, and effing anything that walked. I recently saw him in the beginning of March, and I won't lie, I didn't even recognize him. It took me a solid 30 seconds to realize who it was that was calling my name. Extremely skinny, bags under his eyes, greasy hair, and dirty teeth. I felt effing terrible. I couldn't do anything, but what could I do? He ran away from home, dropped out of school, wasn't on any social media, had no contact with family, and honestly had no family at all besides his dad and 2 distant cousins and a brother. I haven't seen or heard from him since. He could have passed away and I wouldn't have known. Story 20. Where I live, we have a lot of high schools very close to each other. I'm not sure if this is normal, but it is an important detail. To save time, I'll call my school S1 and the neighboring school S2. S2 got an anonymous tip that a student was planning to bomb the school the next day. Everyone that went to or worked at S2 got a day off. S1, however, was not closed. Some people complained that it wasn't fair and total bullcrap, that we should have gotten a day off as well. Fast forward to the next day at 5 a.m., I got a text saying school would be closed that day. We were in the winter months, so a snow day wouldn't be unusual. I noticed there wasn't any snow, so I texted my friend asking if he knew anything about what was going on. He said no, so I went back to bed. Woke up a couple hours later with no follow-up text from the school, so I looked to see if there was anything about the closure on the news. Apparently a girl who went to my school, S1, had made an IG post saying they were going to shoot up the lower commons the next day. She did this because she wanted a day off too, and I really hope she enjoyed it because that was the last time she'll be free for a very long time. She was charged with some kind of terrorism and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Story 21. A couple of guys I knew in college were D1 athletes, but for a niche sport nobody really followed. One night they got drunk and decided it would be a great idea to bleach their initials into the AstroTurf on the football field. Really bad idea, but it got so much worse. Turns out bleach and AstroTurf create a chemical reaction, one known as fire. They burned down the entire field of a D1 football stadium, caused hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages, made national news. It was really bad. Everybody thought they did it on purpose, like some kind of terrorist act. Their only defense was, no, we're not terrorists, we're just idiots. The saddest part is that they were just idiots. but they got expelled from college in their senior years, didn't graduate, and kind of descended into loserdom almost immediately. Typing this is really bumming me out. There's lots of cautionary tales here, guys, okay? So if you're out there, maybe you're listening to this right now and you're thinking, I'm going to bleach my initials into the field. Don't do it. Story 22. Not a few seconds or minutes like some of these, and definitely not in as critical of a situation as some of the other stories, but my best friend growing up was not at all going to pursue more than a job he could get with only a high school education. He lucked out and found a job in a wholesale electrical parts warehouse. Turned out, he has a natural affinity for driving big delivery trucks and maneuvering them into position better than anyone at the warehouse. He went from minimum wage at $16 an hour within 6 months. Then he was bumped up to an in-house position, cutting wire that came with a massive raise to $23 an hour. He was slated to be promoted to one of the 2 manager positions at the warehouse, which would have bumped him up to $26 an hour with a yearly raise of $2 until the ceiling of $30. Too bad he refused to quit smoking. I have nothing against drug use, but if you work at a place you feel connected to, as he did, and they have a no drugs policy, it doesn't matter if it's legal or not legal. If you break the policy, they're going to find out and you're toast. It doesn't matter if you think it's dumb. If you care about your job, stop doing the thing that breaks the policy. My buddy wasn't immediately fired when he was screened, but he was supposed to be, because he was one of their best employees and got along with everyone, because he always came to work prepared and early, didn't come to work high, or have any negative or noticeable habits that pointed to uncontrollable addiction in any regard. The owner of the company told him he would be randomly chosen in the next screening with plenty of time for his system to be clear. He failed that one too, and was given a third chance regardless, and he failed that one as well. Now he's the manager of a Taco Bell working for a salary that amounts to about $8 an hour, 12 hours a day, Monday through Friday, which also means he is legally not paid overtime rates. Definitely not as dire as some of the other stories here, but he went from plans to buy his first new car and apply for a home loan to living in a small micro apartment in his mother's backyard, living paycheck to paycheck. It's been about 4 to 5 years since, and he's still at that Taco Bell. Story 23. A few years ago in the Navy, I was serving as the officer of the day. For our shore command, this was basically night watchman. Shortly after working hours, 2 young enlisted students came into the Master-at-Arms office where I was hanging out with my counterpart, a chief. "P-test us right now," they said. "We've been out in the car smoking all afternoon. We want out of the Navy." Chief immediately replied, "Shut the F up and get out of here right now. I'll forget this all ever happened." "Nope, we want out. We're high as kites and we want a P-test." After we took the samples, sealed them, etc., we sat there with these kids while the Master-at-Arms did the final paperwork, and Chief asked these kids, "Okay, what's the brilliant plan now?" "Well, now that I'm done with the Navy, I'm going to use my GI Bill to go back to college and be an engineer." Folks, being discharged for drug use is a dishonorable discharge, which means you don't get the GI Bill, and instead have roughly the equivalent of a felony conviction on your record for life. I watched as the chief explained that fact, and the kid's eyes darted to the already sealed and signed container of his urine that he could never get back. Watch the realization that he has just picked up a felony by choice when he had been offered every chance to walk away, while he realized that more than half his funding plan for college had just disappeared, along with his eligibility for a lot of loan programs. That is a facial expression I will never forget. Story 24. We had an internship last year where during our onboarding, the company brass took everyone out to the rented bar with 2 drink tokens per person. Most of us were college students, so you were sure to have at least a couple rambunctious types. The company warned us that, while we want you all to have fun, please remember to drink responsibly. People have ruined their internships with us in the past on this night. Most of us ended up having more than 2 drinks, but they had driven us there on coach buses, and they would return us to the nearby hotel afterwards, so we figured it was okay. Well, one guy definitely broke his personal limit, and what ensued was incredibly hard to watch. On the bus ride home, the kid started being obnoxiously loud. Then he stood up and started spouting off racism and nonsense, something about a race war. Finally, the HR manager asked him very politely to sit down multiple times. This only upset the kid further, who then threatened to punch the manager in the face. When we got back, the guy then tried to drive home drunk, while the HR manager frantically tried finding him a DD. I don't know whatever came of that kid, but I'm sure his internship was over after that weekend. It's crazy how you can watch someone totally throw away their career. Imagine having to go back home and try explaining to your parent or guardian or girlfriend why you're there and not at your assignment. Story 25. F it. I'm in the middle of this right now. The fastest you can F your life up is by not even giving life a try. I'm 35 years old and about to likely be homeless within the next year. I've never had any real-life experiences. I'm extremely, morbidly obese, easily on the disability scale. I've never had a job other than helping my dad work in newspapers. I've never kept in touch with any friends, so much so I completely avoided social interaction for 10 years after high school. Speaking of, I never got my high school diploma, even though I did actually put the extra work in for it. 1 extra year due to skipping, including summer, night, and Saturday school. So now that I'm 35, I finally feel the drive to change something. But to add another problem on top of it all, I don't even have a social security number. Never had any kind of government help because of this. So I don't even know where to begin with life. I'm honestly probably going to end up dead before anything changes, but you can definitely F up your life in the split second of never even having tried. Story 26. I've told this story before, but I recently found out where the girl is now. I went to high school with a girl who got pregnant about halfway through my 11th grade year. At the time, she was with a guy, and the guy claimed that he was indeed the father. Fast forward a couple months into the pregnancy, and they break up. And the ex-boyfriend is now saying there's no way the kid is his, that she was pregnant way before they ever had any sort of relations. She refutes this, says it has to be his kid because there's been nobody else. She keeps trying to get the guy to admit that the kid is his, but eventually backs off because an effed up turn of events she gets with her ex's cousin. The baby's born while she's still with cousin, and things seem to calm down until her and the cousin break up. She then starts claiming that the child is either her ex's and he should be paying child support, or that because she had been with the cousin, he should support her and the child. She's so convinced that she decided to take both of them to court. The court runs paternity tests on both men to determine that neither were the father, and as such should not have to support her. Because of all this, she lost a lot of money from court fees, is a single mother who last I heard wasn't with anybody and currently works at McDonald's. This all spiraled over the course of about a year and a half. Story 27. Drugs. Guy was living the dream. He owned a successful business, had a gorgeous wife, cute kid, house in the burbs, and a vacation home on the coast. Within 6 months, this all went up the nose. Wife left him and got total custody of their little boy. Poor lady still cared. When he was committed to the psych hospital where I worked, she came to visit and even told him he could see the child if he got clean. I remember him bickering about a court-ordered 180-day outpatient substance abuse commitment. That basically means that for the first 180 days after he left the hospital, he would have to go to the mental health center every week. If he didn't show up or if his drug screen came back positive, he would be sent back to the hospital. He has the chance to go home, see his son occasionally, hopefully get his life back on track, and all he can do is rage and whine about the cost of transportation to the free clinic, which is in the same town that he lives. Story 28. Drugs. I knew a couple who went from nothing to multi-millionaires and lost everything. Edit. The husband started a company from scratch and worked really hard to make it successful. I'm guessing at that time he was partying somewhat, but mostly just lived a normal life. I knew them then, but they never talked about their drinking or drug side of life because I'm not into all that. So of course it didn't come up in conversation. Gradually, drugs were being used more and more. He got nutty. She got snobby, but also really sick. That went on for years. She constantly had pneumonia. I was like, hey, you're really getting pneumonia a lot. The doctors need to find the root cause because you're too young for this to be happening. I didn't know what she was doing, though. The wife is doing relatively well now from what I gather, but the husband is very much still an addict. He looks very different. He's in and out of jail. He messages incoherent things randomly. It's really sad. Their whole story was so impressive until it unraveled. The last time I visited them, they lived in the apartment that was the most expensive place I had ever even visited, and it wasn't even the only property they owned. Story 29. I saw this one on another Reddit post, and it made my stomach turn. Someone was stabbed at a bar, and the attacker left the knife on the victim. The ambulance shows up, and 2 EMTs attend the victim. One of them was a student who I believe was training to become a doctor or similar title. First thing he does is pull the knife out of the victim, which you aren't supposed to do because it makes them bleed out. The other EMT, who was his supervisor, freaked out and said, "You aren't supposed to pull the knife out of a stabbed victim." The student EMT freaks out and puts the knife back in. The victim died. The student got fired and loses any and all opportunities he had in healthcare in the field in the future. Story 30. Very sad story. The guy had a fantastic partner and lived in a happy relationship, a great career. was highly respected in the organization with further promotion round the corner, with room for working on a PhD project on the side, and had saved a considerable amount of money to buy his own flat. Then he started doing drugs, just for the party fun. Within a little more than just a year, he lost all his money, his partner, and his job, in a way that would make future employment in his profession highly unlikely. Everything he had been building up in the past 15 years. After another couple of months, he unalived himself. The lesson of this is to not do drugs. It is too difficult to control. When you have taken it, you are overconfident and not able to honestly examine your life. When your high is finished, you are too depressed and too much craving another round to thoroughly examine what's even going on. Once you're hooked, there is simply no point of time at which you're able to fully realize what you are doing in your life or to your loved ones. Rest in peace, Andrew. Story 31. Streetcar racing in high school. Yes, illegally. My now husband and another friend we will call TF were setting up to race DH 69 Camaro ZL1 versus TF's 69 Camaro Fastback. TF decides to do a spin out in the parking lot. Blacktop was slick. He loses control and slammed into a crowd of our friends. Girl ended up pinned between TF's car and a light pole. TF was 16 and sent to juvenile facility until he was 20. In and out of rehab since he was released. Girl was 15 and lost both of her legs, one below the knee and the other mid-thigh. Her family moved out of Texas. Story 32. My ex ruined his life with drugs. I was out of town in July and a neighbor offered it to him. I had absolutely no clue. By October, I had found out and his life was falling apart. He crashed his car, wasn't going into his really great job, and was not paying rent. We broke up in January because he refused to go to rehab and he got his second DUI in his mom's car. By March, he was homeless, jobless, carless, girlfriendless, had 2 bench warrants out in his name for the DUI and domestic abuse towards his mom, let all his exotic fish die, no friends left, and he has nothing but the drugs. I've seen him on the streets twice, and I always try to buy him food. He's been out there for over a year now and has no plan on stopping the drugs or going to rehab, no matter how many times his family or I try to offer. It's really a sad, traumatic experience for everyone involved. Within a year, went from really being someone to a homeless drug addict. Story 33. A beautiful friend I had. She took up with this good-looking, charismatic guy. She changed almost immediately, became unreliable, started missing shifts at work. We had kind of drifted apart a bit because I hated her boyfriend. He was too smarmy and smart. My spider sense went overdrive whenever he was around. He had started cutting her off from her friends. I went to see her one day after she had missed so many shifts at work she was about to get fired. I lurked around until I was sure he wasn't there. Then I knocked on the door. When she answered, she was a mess. She stank of sweat and something I couldn't identify. I barged into her flat and I was so shocked at what I saw. She was so skinny. Her once lovely place was a filthy shambles, trash everywhere, dirty clothes all over. I yelled at her, "What is going on? You're about to lose your job? You look like crap." She started crying. Her boyfriend had introduced her to some heavy drug use. Almost immediately after they met and her life had spiraled out of control, she was addicted and he was pushing her to prostitution because he couldn't afford to pay for her habit anymore. She wasn't eating properly. Her diet was crap and she was risking her life because she was type 1 diabetic. I threw some clothes in a bag and dragged her out to my car. I took her straight to the hospital. She was in for 3 weeks, detoxing while having her diabetes monitored so she didn't get too sick. I brought her home to my place. She'd been evicted from hers for non-payment of rent. I was so naive. She promised to never see him again, and I really thought that everything would be okay. 2 days later, I got home from work and found her dead on the bathroom floor. She died of an overdose, the needle still in her arm. It was such a waste, my beautiful, vibrant friend dead in less than 6 months after becoming an addict. Story 34. I didn't destroy my life, but I did lose a lot of money. To understand the story, you must understand that I was not getting my mail from the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation because my physical address and post office were in 2 different zip codes. I notified them of this several times and they were not able to give me a solution. It started when I was pulled over in January. I let the citation sit on the counter for a couple months and forgot about it. I picked it up and realized what I had done and tried to pay the ticket. The online service wouldn't work, and I couldn't connect to any live person or leave a message with the county. I assumed there was a late fee, but I paid what was on the ticket because I didn't know what the cost was. I found out late that because I paid it late, there was a $25 late charge that was added, which I was unaware of. PennDOT suspended my license without notifying me. They tried, but I wasn't getting my mail from PennDOT because I didn't pay the $25 late fee. I never received a notification of any of this and was pulled over about 6 months later. The officer had told me that my license was suspended and gave me a ticket for driving with a suspended license. I tried to plead innocent, but never got my summons because PennDOT couldn't get my mail to me. When all this went down, we discovered the problem, and they assured me that they fixed it in their system and we would have no further problems. Anyway, the penalty for driving with a suspended license was a year suspension. I lost my license for a year for not paying $25. I racked up over 10 grand worth of hotel costs, fines, and Uber fees over the next year. Most people would have kept on driving and lost their license longer. Bottom line was not paying a $25 ticket cost me over 10 grand and a year suspension. I contacted every state representative to try and fight it and had no success. My local rep even told me that the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation is known for lying. There is more ridiculousness to this story, but it's probably not interesting enough for this thread anyway. Story 35. I used to work as a bank teller. This is quite a few years ago now. A couple bought and won a lottery, $1.2 million. I was transitioning to an account manager at that time and was able to sit in on some of the financial planning meetings. We tried everything we could to get them to lock the money down, just in a normal lock for 6 months, nothing crazy, to give them time to think and plan. They refused. Instead, they went shopping. These were not young people either, they were probably in their mid-50s. They gave their 2 adult kids about $100K each, or something like that. Not only did all 4 of them blow all the money within a year, all 4 were in debt and in a financial situation worse than what they started with. Within the 4 months, the mom had blown through 50% of the money, if not more. She was having home shopping network packages delivered to the freaking bank multiple times a week. She didn't want us to tell her husband. It was pathetic and sad to watch. Story 36. Not seen per se, but I knew a kid in 6th grade. For context, I live in the rural county in northern Ohio at the time. This was the kind of place where there were Amish people and a lawnmower racing contest every year. Yes, that rural. I prefer it to where I'm living now, actually. Everyone there owned a gun. It took 30 minutes for the cops to get anywhere. So this kid decided to grab a 20-gauge shotgun out of his parents' safe and F around with it. For context, this was their loaded home defense gun. Cocked and locked, it was semi-automatic. Kid decided to shoot it. 17-year-old brother was home. His brother decided to come outside and tell him to go put it back. Kid turns and walks back towards the house. Kid trips and the gun goes off. 20-gauge buckshot blew off the portion of the top of his brother's skull. There's now brains, blood, and bone strewn across the backyard. Cops pronounced the brother dead on arrival. That kid was never the same. He became pretty quiet, and there was a time when he broke down in class. Don't play with guns, kids. Story 37. Went in for jury duty one day. After an hour or two, we were told anyone with a juror number X and Y can leave for the week. Everyone else has to stay. I was one of the people who got to leave. So I went up to the desk to collect my I really went to jury duty. I didn't just take a day off work paper. I was maybe 5th in line because I was sitting close to the desk. This guy cuts in front of the line of people and starts yelling at the clerk giving out the papers. My time is more valuable than everyone else's here. You need to let me leave. I have very important business to attend to. Do you know who I am? Etc. The clerk was trying to ignore him, but the people in line didn't want to get close to him. The guy ends up reaching out and putting his hand on the clerk's shoulder. That was a mistake. 3 cops tackle this guy to the ground in no time, and he's arrested for assaulting a civil servant. I can't imagine him keeping his very important job after a felony charge, and definitely not getting another very important job in the meantime. Probably 2 minutes max between getting called up and his arrest. Story 38. Our old C-level HR guy. Married, rich, grandkids, nice. Honestly, he always seemed on top of the world. C-level of a super big company and well-respected, close to retirement age. Guy starts going on dates with a girl who works for him. She's about 20 years younger than him and a really wonderful person. Anyway, he falls for her, but she realizes she's not into him. and cuts it off, but he keeps pursuing her. She finally goes to the other executives and explains what's happening. They come up with an agreement with her. She'll move to another part of the company and he has to sign a disclosure saying he won't contact her while he worked at the company. They offer this to him and he says no, he's in love. He's too old to care anymore and he's willing to give up everything for her. Finally, they fire the guy. His wife leaves him. He loses his stock options. His grandkids don't visit him. The girl blocked all contact from him. This all happened within 2 weeks. I've never seen someone just destroy their life like that. Story 39. I have ruined my own life pretty well before I was even 18. Basically, my parents had recently divorced and my father had moved away. I quickly moved out of my mother's as soon as I had a job that could cover rent and I had enough for a bond. Being Mr. Popular, I started having massive parties in my flat. Got pretty sucked into the life and thought it would be super cool to unofficially make my slogan, F it. Cool, right? To cut the story short, I started just not paying my rent and bills, spending money on nice clothes, drugs, alcohol. The whole time I was neglecting my family life and stopped talking to my mom and dad. Managed to work up quite a debt and owing local drug dealers quite a bit of money. Eventually, my boss got sick of me turning up for work late and high. It did get pretty ridiculous considering having a line of drugs was something I did after brushing my teeth before leaving for work to help counter me not having slept the night before. And one day I popped out to pick up some drugs and returned to find the locks changed on my flat door. All of my belongings were in there. All of my clothes, a $2,000 gaming rig, a lot of stuff with emotional value as well as actual value, my phone. The entire situation was effed because I literally didn't know what to do. I had no job, no phone, nowhere to live, and only the clothes on my back. I walked to my mother's house to find she wasn't there and basically just broke in through a slightly open window and laid on the carpet crying. Turned out, she had gone on a 6-month holiday. Anyway, so I lived off just eating my mother's food and had a few changes of clothes in the attic. Eventually worked up the courage to see if I could break into the flat and try to get some of my stuff. Managed to climb up the drain pipe and found the entire flat empty, apart from my large, low-to-the-ground bed. And to my luck, my phone was still under my pillow. So I got out, headed down to the bank and withdrew my last $40 and canceled my card, ordering a new one to my mother's address. It was on my way back to my mother's I met an old friend from school who invited me for a drink and a game of pool. I accepted, if anything, just to take my mind off of it all. Anyway, he asked how I was, and I kind of very casually explained how effed I was. He very kindly offered for me to take a spare room at his place if I could find a job, and as long as I started paying back the drug dealers so we didn't have people smashing in the front door. I nodded slowly and turned to the woman behind the bar asking if they were hiring. And after a brief conversation, the woman took me into the back room and had me sign a contract. Today, I have my own house, a mortgage, a good job, a girlfriend of 5 years, and a 1-year-old child. All my debts paid, and I haven't touched drugs for about 7 years and drink very rarely. And I have started reconnecting with my family. No matter how deep a hole you dig for yourself, you can always fix it. I know this isn't what the video's about at all, but we love happy endings. Wait, story 40. Big brother had great grades. Top 2 percentile in SAT. Would normally give you access to become a doctor like our mom. Very, very shy and a kind guy all around. But in high school, his teacher for a obligatory course told him to hand in an assignment before the end of the semester. He skipped it because he had done very well on the test, so he thought he was fine, even though the teacher warned him. He got an F in only that course that was obligatory, which meant he couldn't attend college. He spiraled into depression from loneliness when he lost his friends that all started college. Remember, extremely shy guy. He has been unemployed basically his whole life after that, 40 years old now. He doesn't do drugs, he doesn't game, just spends time on books and Reddit, being miserable and ashamed. Our parents both tried the carrot and the stick. The depression from loneliness changed him from a normal introvert into an extreme introvert that can at most talk 20 minutes. Sitting with him is fine though. What should have been a small bump in the road cost him everything. If he had done 2 hours of homework, I'm 100% sure he would have just followed his friends and would have become a programmer. I know it sounds like he's just a lazy idiot, but the shame and depression that he has is something I've never seen in anyone. We pretty much had the same personality, and his IQ was way higher, but I went to an elite college that I could only motivate myself to finish because of friends that suffered with me, by my side. Just dumb luck on my part and ill luck on his. In summary, Never underestimate friendship and the effect of loneliness, and even the smallest of bumps can be catastrophic if you don't take depression and massive amounts of shame seriously. Story 41. My mother's death. She made all the wrong decisions that led to her passing. She had abdominoplasty in a foreign country. After the procedure was complete, she discharged herself against medical advice and did not take any blood thinner medication to avoid blood clots. She just left. She was wheeled to an airport, and she lied to members of staff that her surgery was just laser, so they let her onto the plane. It takes 4 to 6 weeks to fully recover. She just up and left within days. About a week or so later, she started feeling unwell and her surgery started infecting. She visited the doctor in her home country and she lied to him about the procedure she had. And he did not examine her properly, so he gave her the wrong medication. Because of her not taking her post-op medicine and taking wrong prescribed medication along with immediately going into a flight, she died. She died from a blood clot in the heart. She was digging her own grave with every action she made. I've seen people quickly ruin their life by posting a controversial meme or making a racist comment, but my mother's demise really tops off the quickest way an individual has absolutely destroyed their life. Story 42. A once close friend of mine was a super popular theater kid, had his whole life planned out for his acting career and everything. That was until right before his junior year of high school ended, where he went to a cast party after a play he was in was over. And that night, when everyone went to bed, he pretty much decided to use the opportunity to SA someone. I've never seen someone go from the popular to the underachieving quiet new kid in a different school district so fast. It really hurt watching that happen. He always seemed so nice and like one of the few people I could trust. That effed up a lot of things for me emotionally and socially. I still don't know why he did it. He just had a lot of good crap going for him. But I guess either he thought he was cool enough to get away with it or he cracked under pressure and purposefully tried to F it up. Either way, I lost a good friend that night. And even after 2 years, I still don't know how to process it. Story 43. New guy came to our school in Australia from New Zealand. And I don't know why, but I was always that guy to make friends with the new person because starting at a new school could be tough for some people. We hung out and introduced him to my friend group, but the Islanders, Polynesians, at my school always got up to mischief, like smoking and skipping school as normal kids that rebel do. He started hanging out with them, and I had no problems with it because he got along with them well. But he was a sweet guy and would always say hi to me and my friends when we'd see him. The last time I saw him, I was at the pub, and he was proper hammered, and I told him if he needed a lift home to come find me, and I'll take him home, and he agreed. Then it gets late, and on the drive home, we see a wicked car crash, but didn't think much of it. Next morning, I hear from my friend that he stole a car, tried to drunk drive home, and a cop tried to pull him over, but he ignored the cop, which led to a cop chase, and he ended up wrapping his car around a tree and later died in a hospital while holding his mother's hand. He was only 19. I don't blame anyone for his death, and I will always remember that time he asked me about the crew, Islanders, that he ended up hanging out with when he decided that would be the path he took and how just like that, he sealed his destiny. I regularly drive past where he had that accident that led to his death, and it always reminds me a small choice can go so far. Story 44. Happened last year. A high school friend of mine stuck around in our hometown for a decade after graduating. She had a pretty rough childhood but was improving in her life in recent years. She had a job she loved, was recently engaged, posting on social media, good times, etc. Then everything changed. Her father committed self-unaliving, and learning of the news, she resorted to getting very drunk, as I imagine I would do under the circumstances as well. She decided to drive somewhere. I'm not sure of the details of where to and from, but she was driving at night in our suburban hometown. She ended up hitting another someone running a red light. Upon investigation, it turned out being one of her friends from high school and mine. He died that night, and she's currently serving 10 years in prison. Personally, the quickest and most disturbing way I've ever heard anyone ruin their life, of their family, of an innocent and kind human being, and of the victim's family, as well in the course of events of a day. Story 45. Not nearly as bad as some of the things I've read in this thread, but back in high school I dated a girl who turned out to be bat crap crazy. We broke up. I found out that she had cheated on me with at least 2 people, maybe more. She ends up getting one of the guys she cheated on me with on the hook. They date for a while, he starts to get sick of her crap and is considering leaving. So she stops taking her birth control without telling him, in a deliberate attempt to trap him with a baby. Long story cut very short, she got pregnant on prom night, failed all her classes, didn't graduate high school, and the poor idiot that knocked her up was given an ultimatum by his very conservative Catholic family. He could propose in 2 months or less, or he could be disowned. Both parties were 18 at the time. She was a high school dropout, and I believe he didn't go to college so he could work and support her and the kid. Haven't seen or heard from either in years. I hope the kid and the dad are doing okay. The dad was a decent human, and obviously the kid didn't do anything wrong. Not about to look them up, though. I have no desire to peek into Pandora's box of nutso with the mom. Story 46. Group of teen girls in my town decided to get drunk last year and drove 90 plus miles an hour down a dangerous 2-lane highway. They hit a guardrail, flipped multiple times, and then the car burst into flames. All but one died in the crash, and now the one that lived is apparently really struggling with survivor's guilt, all for a night of fun. Fortunately, the survivor was a passenger, not the driver, or probably would have faced legal issues on top of losing her best friends. Also had a 22-year-old girl drive absolutely wasted and hit another car head-on the highway, killed the 14-year-old girl in the other car, and left the girl's mother basically a vegetable. But she lived with no real lasting injuries and will spend the next 40 to 50 years behind bars. She also then tried to claim she was a victim of SA in an attempt, and that's why she was driving to flee from the poor idiot she was getting drunk with. Turns out she'd actually just stolen it from him and he caught her, and that's why she was driving. Don't drink and drive, kids. Alcohol is legal, but it's the most dangerous drug in our society by far. Story 47. Her freshman year of college, my sister met, fell for, and married a musician who was convinced that his big break was right around the corner. To support himself while he worked on his musical career, he drank. My sister had a scholarship to a good college, not prestigious but solid. She was studying biochemistry. A year later, she's pregnant and drops out, works a full-time job to support them and the baby because the love of her life was too drunk to hold down a job. 10 years and another kid later, she finally divorces him, but the damage was done. She replaced him with someone almost as useless, still works crap dead-end jobs, and lives in a house our grandmother paid for just so her great-grandkids will have a roof over their heads without the fear of eviction. She went from promising college student with a decent shot at a good future to working minimum wage jobs and watching her husband drink away every cent they couldn't spare in less than a year. It's been over 20 years and things aren't any better for her, and I have no hope that they ever will be. Story 48. There was this girl I went to high school with. She was a freshman while I was a junior. She and her boyfriend broke up one day, and he took it well and moved on. Not started dating someone else moved on, but accepted that they were broken up and no longer together. Now, obviously, this was the wrong thing to do. In retaliation to her boyfriend being mature about their breakup, she posted a video of her having relations with him on her social media and sent it to everyone in the school, including the principal and superintendent. Her boyfriend had no idea that she had a video of them, and he was just as surprised as everybody else. Anyway, after all that, she went on an all men are pigs crusade and started to talk crap about everyone who had a chicken in the school. I had maybe said 3 words to her in the entire time she was at the school, and she spread rumors that I was a predator and an SAer. Some other guys got much worse rumors spread about them. I had no friends at the time, so I had absolutely no way of defending myself. I just had to suffer through it because people believed her. This is also the same school that voted me most likely to be a school shooter until some kid actually threatened to do it. Needless to say, she's pretty effed up for the rest of her life. She's hot, so even though she has a well-documented history of being crazy, she still gets her daily 3-course meal of chicken whenever she wants. Job-wise, no one will hire her, so she does whatever prostitution she can to make rent. She had no reason to do what she did. The only one she ever hurt was herself because everyone supported her boyfriend after that. I saw her again one day when one of my friends brought her to a smoke sesh I was having. She showed up acting like she never did anything to the guys there, expecting to smoke and be in my drugs in my own house. We booted that friend pretty quickly after that, and last I heard, he got exactly what was coming to him after she pulled the same crap on him. Story 49. I was in a pretty prestigious college program with some dedicated and motivated peers. One student effed up really badly. He was treasurer of his fraternity, specifically for his chapter, but there's chapters nationwide. It came out late junior year that he had embezzled, I think, 10 grand from the chapter. No idea what he did with it. He ended up returning it with interest, so he didn't get charged, which would have been a felony for the amount. The school didn't do anything as technically Greek life wasn't run through them, but somehow still a part of campus life. And they had an office with other student orgs. So technically, because it was an off-campus association, they couldn't expel him, especially because he wasn't charged. But he left school ASAP when this came out, stepped down as treasurer, I think voluntarily left the chapter, and finished the semester remotely. He had also just won the election for student body president and forfeited the position. Didn't come back to school for senior year, and I'm not sure he finished his degree. He immediately got rid of his social media accounts, but later came back with a different name, so I'm not sure what happened, but he looked happy. Thing was, he ruined his chances at a really good career in our field. He could have done well as he was already doing well in our program. I guess it's not a super big F up as he voluntarily left his positions, and I think the frat didn't press charges to save his sorry butt. He had his whole life ahead of him at 20 and 21, but he still ruined his chances for other things elsewhere. It's bound to come up in his future and get him real good. Story 50. My younger brother was such an inspiration to me at one point. He had 2 beautiful boys with his even more beautiful fiancée. I lived with him to help out, but was in a bit of a rut with my life's progression. We used to party a little on the weekends, drugs and booze, and we tried to keep it in line. One day an attractive girl shows up to one of our parties with some heavy drugs. I tried it, and I could tell that it would mess up my life even more if I got hooked. My brother wasn't as lucky. He cheated on his fiancée with that girl and got too into the stuff, went as far as having all of the addictions above. I'm the older brother, so I feel somewhat guilty, but at the same time, I quit all of that stuff. I even made it blatantly obvious that I was quitting because of my influence on him, that he could hopefully do better. He gradually has, and his life is somewhat returning to where it was, but with different people. He's cleaned up, and I'm grateful, but I can't help but think how different would all of this be if either of us told that girl just to scram. Story 51. My friend's dad died when we were 19. He was an only child, and the mom had divorced and remarried, so only he was in the will. He inherited about 160 grand. He talked about putting most of it away, investing, buying a house, etc. In less than a year, it was all gone. He had quit his job and was at the casino almost every day, gambling and drinking away. He even gave me hundreds of dollars to gamble with him. Every time we'd go out, he offered to pay for everything for our entire group, and he'd keep tipping the waitresses really well, so they'd keep serving us drinks. He would buy and buy an ungodly amount of drugs and alcohol. I honestly don't think he was sober much of that year. He really had a problem before that, and all that money almost killed him. He's now 26 and lives with his girlfriend and has a young daughter. He's mentioned more than once how he wishes he was smart with that money, and he can't believe the things he used to do. Honestly, that kid was the best thing for him. He's been sober for almost 3 years now and had a stable job working for the city. Yeah, this seems to be a reoccurring theme when people get a lump sum of money. They kind of just throw their whole life away and spend all the money in the worst ways possible. That's why you won't catch me with 160 grand. It's a purposeful lifestyle choice I've made, unless anyone's offering. Story 52. I worked with a guy for a couple years whose entire life changed in a moment. A little backstory. He had been mugged about 6 months prior to this happening, and it really shook him up. He got a gun for self-defense as well as a concealed carry permit. He was married, and when he was at work, one night his wife had her female friend over at the house. They had some drinks and decided to scare my friend when he got home from work. They hid in his closet, were going to jump scare him. He got into the house and heard them in the closet and got scared and fired his gun through the door. He shot his own wife, and she ended up dying. This all happened years before I knew him, so I can't say how it changed him, but he was just a normal guy when I knew him. You'd never guess he had anything like that happen in the past, but I'm sure it changed him somehow. Story 53. Guy I was dating at the time when I was 17 decided to pick me and my friend up drunk in his Firebird late at one night. He decided to take the back roads with no streetlights that were winding and covered in trees. Friend in the back taps me on the shoulder and tells me to put my seatbelt on because he's now speeding and not listening to the tell him to slow down calls. He's scaring the crap out of us, and I'm almost in tears. We end up fishtailing and flipping 4 times over, sliding on the roof of the Firebird full speed ahead until we hit a guardrail and flip back over and spin out again. I look over in the driver's seat and his body is limp and halfway in the back seat. He's covered in blood and won't wake up. I thought he was dead. It's deadly silent out in the middle of nowhere. Some people come running out of a house and call the cops, and the ambulance comes to pick him up. They get him on a stretcher and he's in and out of consciousness. Today he's got permanent screws and plates in his face, and he was so handsome before the accident. After that, he became a wreck. He gained weight and didn't care about himself at all. The last time I saw him, he was a full-blown alcoholic and messy as ever, still living at home with his parents in the attic and didn't have a job. He's in his 30s. His cop said we all should have died that night, and it's a miracle we didn't. It took me about 7 years to ever trust anyone else to drive me around. Story 44. Not so fast, but crap went down really quick at one point. This story is a bit long. Had a friend since elementary school. He was the class clown. He was also not very smart, but he was great with people and super funny. I remember he came from a home with an absent dad and neglectful mother, an older sister, and a younger half-brother out of wedlock. His mother would usually arrive late from work and go on dates with several guys. He was alone with this younger brother most of the day. In junior high, his sister got pregnant from a guy who dumped her, so she got back together with a drugged-up ex-boyfriend who swore he would take care of the baby. My friend was extremely sad, and things in his house seemed to be spiraling out of control. His mother and sister were fighting. She kicked her daughter out of the house. My friend was sadder than ever. He would start crying if someone asked about how his sister was doing. He also started drinking at age 14. We graduated from junior high and I lost contact with him. Next thing I know from mutual friends, he got into drugs really quick and was constantly failing and getting expelled from at least 3 schools due to his low grades. He never made it past second semester. Now this is where things start getting effed up real quick. He drops out and gets into really hard drugs. His mom and his girlfriend convince him to go into rehab. Mind you, rehab in some centers in Mexico can be very, very tough and borderline torture. He goes to rehab, but the damage to his brain is done. He loses track of a conversation as he is having it and forgets things said a minute earlier. He seems absent-minded most of the time and reacts and talks slowly. Out of rehab, he gets his girlfriend pregnant and his mother kicks him out of his house. He has no studies, permanent drug damage, and no house. He lives with his girlfriend's family for a bit. The baby is born. Since he can get no job because he didn't finish high school, he starts working as an Uber driver and earning a little bit of money. He relapses and starts doing mild drugs. His younger brother finds him doing drugs and tells his girlfriend. His girlfriend gives him an ultimatum. Either he quits doing drugs or he loses custody of their child. He promises to sober up, but he fails. The last I knew, his now ex-girlfriend was about to take him to court to take his custody. In a span of less than 3 years, my friend threw his entire life away. Story 55. Drugs. I'm gay and it is super prevalent in our corner of the world. I'm not adverse to drugs in moderation. I eat THC and CBD edibles a couple of times a week, and I'm okay with that because it doesn't F up my life. I don't mind if you have a wild weekend with your friends and snort some stuff or whatever, but again, in moderation. I'm currently going through a divorce, which has been absolutely heartbreaking and horrible in many ways. My husband decided to dabble in some heavier drugs. Then the dabbling became a problem, and a problem really fast. Then the lies started. Then the money was always missing. Then the weirdness. I guess I should have been smarter. He started seeming sketchy all the time. He would unscrew light bulbs and then lie about why. All sorts of weird crap like that. I cashed out my retirement to send him to Betty Ford, thinking that was the answer. Nope. Now I live a life where I live at my sister's house, which I'm grateful for, but sucks because I don't feel like my own independent man. I do this because I had to get out while I try and get through strapped finances, especially during COVID. I came to a very tearful decision where I finally realized I couldn't fix him. And I don't want to be there when he ODs and dies because I think that is where this is going. Because he went from snorting to smoking and now shooting. I also can't deal with all the lies. The other thing that is crazy is I married young. He is 28 and I'm in my 40s. When we got married, he looked so young. Now he looks much older than me. Much older than me. Story 56. My freshman year of college, one of the frat pledges got into a local bar and was hitting on some girls there. Apparently their male friend didn't like that and ended up putting something in his drink. On his way back to the frat house, he had to cross a bridge and ended up either jumping or falling off. He was found by the police at 6:30 under the bridge. He had lost a lot of blood and ended up breaking half of his ribs and his arm in several places, fractured his orbital, broken femur, and shattered his pelvis. That's not to mention the concussion, internal bleeding, and all the stitches. His frat brothers ended up going to that bar after he had woken up in the hospital and demanded to see the security footage and found whoever drugged him. Several of them paid him a visit and beat him within an inch of his life. They were all charged with attempted murder, but I think they ended up pleading down to aggravated assault. All in all, one person is disabled for life and in the ICU for a while, another just in the hospital, and 4 to 5 others are serving prison time. Story 57. I work in construction, mostly larger commercial sites. The rigger on my old site wasn't the smartest guy ever, and we didn't get along, but he was competent. Even though it was only a V6 and not even a classic, he was in love with his Mustang convertible. It was all he ever talked about, except for his 2 favorite other things, which were smoking and having relations with prostitutes. I got the impression he went for the higher quality ones, not the life for me, but he's at work every day and doing his job. This is back before the Great Recession, where there was tons of work and tons of easy credit. He was offered a line of credit, possibly from the bank, but I don't know for sure. He had never had a line of credit before and gave it lots of thought. In the end, he went for it. $20,000, I'm told. I don't know who talked him into it, but he decided to upgrade from smoking to using some heavier drugs with the money from his line of credit. Within a few days, he's missing work here and there and not fit to do his job when he does show up. There was only one rigger on a site this size, and it's non-stop all day. It was only a week before he lost his position. He was demoted to laborer, which would be a noteworthy cut in pay and a huge loss for prestige, which I think mattered to him. A few weeks later, his Mustang is sold and he's driving around in a busted-up old minivan. I saw him driving it, and there were rumors he was living in it. A few weeks later, he's fired. He just doesn't show up to work very much and is doing a terrible job while he is there. In the coming weeks, there were rumors that he was giving some relations at the park for drug money. I have no idea if it was true, but I know people do some pretty crazy stuff when they're addicted. He eventually got it under control enough to return to work, but he died from an overdose. With no friends or family, the foreman of the site he was on had to claim his body, and I think that's the saddest part of the story. Story 58. This almost happened to me. When I was around 13, I was bullied regularly in school. I was a big kid, almost 6 foot already, and had ASD, so I was a prime target, I guess. This school was pretty crap about dealing with bullies, the kind of place that tells you to shake it up and make it up, or that must have been both sides at fault, stirring a fight. Anyway, after having this kid sitting behind me, whispering abuse to me all class, when we let out, he ran up behind me and slapped the back of my head. I responded by grabbing him as he tried to run away and proceeded to nearly kill him. At the time, I was honestly trying to. I'd broken a rib, his arm, 2 of my fingers, and given him a concussion before the teacher showed up to pull me off. This was in the middle of a busy corridor to show how much the staff here cared. Anyway, kids' parents tried to press charges. Police were called in the next day. School staff all saying that it was an unprovoked attack because, F me, I guess. Luckily, the officer thought to ask some of the other kids about what happened. This bully had been tormenting so many other people with his gang, had stolen from and beaten up at least 5 other kids who would be willing to testify that the police went back to the kids' parents and said, if you press charges, we'll press charges back. And as they were a rich family who didn't want their precious child in a scandal, they backed down. I left that school very soon after, took tests locally after teaching myself at home, and now have a comfortable government job. P.S. I know this is a mess to read, sorry. Dude, you're 13 and you're trying to mess with a kid who's 6 foot with a vicious hook? Pays to be brainless. Story 59. Kid I knew since early elementary school. We'll call him Gary. I never was all that close to Gary, was always misbehaving in and out of class, but in the kid's way of misbehaving. Disrespect, dirty jokes. Heck, I could probably add a bit of bullying, but I didn't know him well enough to confirm this. Basically, never enough to put him in any serious trouble, but he definitely got some punishments from the school teachers and after-school counselors. A good-sized chunk of the other kids thought of him as a class clown. Others saw an annoying brat that never got the punishment he deserved. Come middle school, and he took up vaping. He wasn't the brightest kid, but he knew well enough not to puff smoke in front of any school officials. Only did it in the bathroom and outside of school. Even from elementary, he wasn't always hanging with what you'd call the good kids. But at this point, he probably lost everyone who would be considered one. Just him and the kids were able to put up with him. So fast forward, it's the night before we all move on to high school. Up until this point, I was always in the same school as him, but we ended up in different high schools. Looking back, he didn't seem like he'd end up doing anything serious, aside from vaping. I'm not trying to downplay that. He was just a bit of a goofy troublemaker. About halfway through freshman year, that goofy troublemaker was being sent off to juvie. I think that's how you spell it, for possession of drugs. I heard the story from my mom, who didn't mention if the drugs were the vape he carried or some other substance. Still probably in juvie. This happened not too long ago. It definitely screwed up the rest of his life going forward. Story 60. I had a friend who spent over 70 grand he apparently didn't have on online casinos in one night. He had to have a debt mediator to retain all of his salary to pay the debt. He was the kind of dude who came up every week with another story of this kind, but this one takes the cake. Some other stories? Spending thousands of dollars on a fake girl so she can come live with him. Ivorian scam. And even when I proved him it was a scam all along. Buying a new car. Getting drunk with the ex-owner to celebrate and crashing the car beyond repair instantly. Giving his car to a supposedly new girlfriend he knew for a few days. Weeks later, when he asked her, she refused to give it back. Giving his expensive guitar in exchange for a few drinks, and so many other horrible stories. That guy can't manage himself. Fortunately, he has a lovely family to back him up, otherwise he'd be living on the streets. Story 61. Last year, we were preparing to go to a world camp in the United States. Everything was planned. We were a group of 40 people, and each of us had been saving almost 2 full years to go to this camp. Overall, we had the first meetings among the 40, and we became friends with each other. There was this guy who had become the friendliest of the entire group. We all had a great time with him, and he told us that he had worked 2 full years with his father. He was just 18 years old to get the money for the camp. His entire family was very proud of him, and he was fulfilling his grandfather's dream, going to an international camp. A week before camp, the boy decided to celebrate with his friends, and they planned to go to the park to smoke it up. They found other guys in the park, and because of the moment, they invited them to the smoke. After a few hours, one of these guys went home and his mother caught him high, called the police, and they caught my friend. Turns out that the boys who met in the park were minors. In addition, my friend was still in the uniform of the group with which we were going to make the trip. To make the story a little shorter, my friend had to pay a huge fine for possession of illegal narcotics, for having promoted the consumption in minors, and for using drugs in a public place. And if that weren't enough, the police contacted the group with which we would travel and made him unable to travel to the camp. They expelled him from the group forever, and he could not recover any of the money he had spent on the trip and in the camp, since everything was paid and registered. In short, my friend and his family had spent years saving and were excited to fulfill a dream, and in one day, everything was lost due to the excitement of the moment. Lesson: don't get carried away by the excitement of the moment. Story 62. My friend joined the USMC shortly after 9/11. When you watch videos of the Marines moving into Iraq, he was part of that group. Survived some awful crap. Anyway, he came back and was talking up this girl he met in another state while he was on leave. Considering what he went through, we were happy to see him happy. He leaves to return to base, and the state this girl was in, suddenly we lose contact with him. Come to find out, he didn't tell us the whole story. Turns out the girl was 16, and he was 22. Military found out and went to arrest him for statutory SA, and he went AWOL. Nobody could find him for a few months until he started running out of money. He ended up contacting a family member who got his location, then the family member contacted the military police, and they arrested him, court-martialed him, and dishonorably discharged him. Last time we talked, he was convinced he'd get reinstated, and then he vanished. Dumb idiot went back to the girl and got in trouble all over again. At this point, I have no idea what happened to him. Story 63. A few of you have mentioned your drug issues and mistakes you've made. Some of you are still working on your issues. In my mid-20s, I had a great job tending a bar at a very popular beach bar. Made great cash, had great friends, was getting numbers from pretty girls constantly. Rented a cottage that was behind my mother's beach house from my mother. One night after work, I went back to an acquaintance's place to smoke it up. Turned out, he had some heavier drugs in his pipes. It was the most amazing high I'd ever had. Within 3 months, I'd lost my job. Most of my friends, no girl would talk to me. Within another couple, I'd alienated most of my family, and my mother evicted me. I was down to skin and bones. I sold off almost everything I had. I was an errand boy for the local dealers to have a hint of it. They took great joy in humiliating me in any way they could. The last day before I had to vacate, I had one last set of friends that took me in. All of my possessions essentially had to fit in my car. I don't know if you've ever lived in a beach town, but when I was there in the wintertime, there are no jobs. There was no money. I eventually had to drive 30 to 45 minutes to work at a Burger King. I had scored high enough on my SATs to not have to take freshman English in college. Missed the same with math by 10 points, and I was begging to get a job at Burger King. I had a few rough years after that. Poverty, immense debt, poor choices in my early 20s, and I was about $20K behind on taxes, in addition to legal fees for various moving violations. I still ended up spending a week in jail before getting bailed out again. Again, moving and court violations as I was trying to make a life for myself. More of my 20s were spent in a crappy place than enjoying them. I'm in my late 40s now. I have a 3-letter job title with the letter C in front of it. I own a 3,500 square foot house. I take my wonderful daughter to see a couple new countries every year. The success I have today, I have because of my failure. It sucked. Life was hard, but I was able to survive. What I learned from that was the confidence to make decisions, the confidence to try new things, because I made about the worst decision I could have made, and I lived. It was hard work to get out of the hole I dug myself, and I had help, obviously, but don't let the dark days consume you. Keep hope alive and don't settle for what life gives you. Find a way to make your own path. Snaps. Snaps all around for inspiration. Honestly, I want to hear more of his story. And if you wouldn't mind dropping the old 10-step rags to riches program down below, that would be cool too. Story 64. My sister had a great scholarship for a master's program at a top university in Massachusetts. Good part-time job in her field and her own apartment in the city. This was her dream scenario for years. But she got depressed and dropped out of school after the first semester. Then she quit her job and moved in with family close to the area. She lived with them for 8 months. Food was paid for, no rent was demanded, she had free use of a car and a key to the house. Good place to sort some things out. Eventually, she made some comment about a baby in the family being a trigger for her relapses, followed by a comment wondering what it would be like to kill someone. She spent a couple of days in the ER and was ejected with nowhere to go. Our family had to kick her out, and she had cut communication with our parents who live in the Midwest about the same time she quit her job, so she had nowhere to go. She wound up in a shelter for a while and living in a hotel for a month, burning through what was left of her savings. She's coping better now and got an apartment and job, but to answer your question, about 8.5 months. Story 65. A guy I knew in school was really smart, had great prospects, and overall was a great guy. He met a girl and she got pregnant pretty soon after. It all went downhill from there. He started missing classes, wouldn't respond to messages, flaked on social gatherings. We thought it was commitment to his growing family, but it soon became apparent that the girl was abusing him mentally, using the baby as leverage and playing on his fears of potentially losing his child. It slowly drove him insane. It all came to a head when I heard he finally lost it and he hit her. She went straight to the police and totally effed up his future. However, that's not where this ends. A few years later, in our local paper, there was a story about a self-unaliving in the woods near our home. Turned out he'd unalived himself. About 6 months after, I got talking to an old friend who knew him also. This friend's dad was a police officer in the area, and in conversation about the self-unaliving, it came up. Turns out he'd handcuffed himself to a tree and threw away the key, and then just took a bunch of drugs. The drugs didn't work, and it seemed he had a change of heart. They found him with his arm worn to the bone, teeth marks and scratches all over him. He died of exposure. Story 66. My cousin's ex-husband seemed like a good guy. He had played D1 football at a good college. Needless to say, he was a big boy. He and my cousin have been married 20 plus years when she leaves him. My aunt was an 84-year-old widow, very active, played golf, walked a lot. When walking in the mornings, she would bring some of her neighbors' newspapers to their front door. One day that didn't happen, so the neighbors were concerned. They tried calling, knocked on the door, no answer, so they had the police do a wellness check. They found her body. She had been beaten to death. We found out she had been paying for my cousin's husband's classes he was taking for a career change. When my cousin left him, my aunt cut him off. He went to see her and ended up murdering her. He tried to deny it, but there was too much evidence. It also came out that he was addicted to some drugs. He hit my aunt so hard that her head was disconnected from her spinal cord. Now he's doing 50 years in the pen. Story 67. I know this POC who lived in Brooklyn. He busted his butt his whole life, went from public school to Princeton to Columbia Law. Last year, he got a job at a big law firm in New York City, earning $180K per year base with substantial bonus potential. About 2 weeks ago, he and some friends went out in Brooklyn for the BLM protests. Unfortunately, he thought it was a good idea to try and hand out Molotov cocktails to other protesters. Most declined his offer. At night, he threw Molotovs at an unoccupied police car, causing it to catch on fire. He was caught about 10 minutes later. Right now, he's sitting in Rikers, facing charges that have a 4-year minimum sentence and a max of life. Even if by some miracle he beats all the charges or gets the minimum, he will 100% be disbarred. So at best, he does 4 years in prison and has to come out of prison with his career gone, and at worst, he does life in prison. Only 3 weeks ago, he was somebody who had worked his butt off and achieved the brightest possible future. Now his best case scenario is multiple years in prison and no more career. Story 68. I went to school with a beautiful girl. Most American Idol fans would know who I'm talking about. Everyone else can Google the girl I'm talking about, but I'll tell my story first before names. I went to grade school with her, and she was always outgoing and popular. In high school, she was one of the most stunningly beautiful girls I've seen throughout my life. She went to a different high school than I, but we were friends on Facebook at the time. She was a junior, I believe. And I remember thinking how I envied her life, her friends, parties, her fun personality. She was engaged to be married and posted the video of her adorable fiance popping the question while she was at work at Starbucks. She was driving home one night and hydroplaned into a telephone pole. I believe alcohol was involved. Now she is wheelchair bound. One eye is drooped shut and has difficulty talking. You would not recognize her as the same person unless you were her close friends or family. She lives with her family, whom she depends on to care for her for a lot of things. Her fiancé stuck by her a little while, and she was still in love with him. Still wore the engagement ring for a long time, perhaps even still, but he eventually moved after his music blew up in another country. He was engaged, probably married now, and has a child. I still see the dramatic, devastating, life-altering change all these years later, and would see all of her posts tagging her fiancé. A few years later, he moved to Sweden, and she would count down the days until he would return to visit in Facebook posts. But eventually, he just moved on. To lose your fiancé like that, by your side and eventually drifting apart while you watched? It seems like even a friendship is lost between them, and it's devastating to think about how that must feel. So, American Idol fans certainly know who I'm talking about. Juliana. She was Chris Medina's fiance. Chris took her on American Idol and stood in front of the judges and said, "What kind of man would I be if I left her now?" Steven Tyler gave her a kiss. Mo saw the moment and have long forgot about it. I saw it as it happened, and as the years have gone by, and I watched that man eventually leave her. Tragic. Story 69. My uncle. First, some background. My uncle is a wealthy man. He is single with no kids, so he has quite a bit of money to spare. His life savings is around $250K. Not sure. No loans. Not bad for a 42-year-old man. So, there is a casino in Melbourne, Australia called Crown. It's pretty popular. We went there for all-you-can-eat buffet, and he noticed the slot machines and table games, so he went over there. Me and my brother were at the table when this happened, but he bought $205,000 worth of chips, and he went to the blackjack table. To play, according to him, he had experience, so he kept playing. He lost quite a lot of times, but he was so determined to win, he kept playing and playing. The money he spent was nowhere near his winnings. He was at a loss of $116K. At this point, we were unaware of this, so we couldn't stop him. It was like he was possessed. He wouldn't stop spending. By this time, we were heading out, and he came with his own car, so he stayed behind. When we went home the next day, he knocked on our door and asked to speak with my dad. According to my dad, he lost all his life savings gambling. He asked for a loan from him, but my dad refused, knowing he would most likely spend it on gambling and waste it. We hadn't heard from him since my dad told me he took a loan from the bank to try to get a handle on his life back. That is why never gamble without a trusted friend or family member with you to make sure you're not going overboard. Story 70. Long before the internet, a friend of mine from high school during the summer after graduation used to take his motorcycle out late at night and speed when the roads were clear. The guy never did drugs and understood engines better than anyone in this city. He had a promising career as an auto mechanic, as the mechanics in town would call this guy in during elementary school to solve problems they couldn't figure out. He was out speeding one night through a 2-lane road that bisected a golf course. There was a fence on either side of the road, so there was no place for cops to hide a speed trap, so he stepped on it. Kids used to aim the sprinklers from the golf course onto the road to hit passing cars, and the road was wet when he hit a slight S-curve, doing about 80 miles an hour and a 45 at 4 a.m. He lays the bike down, and he and the bike are sliding down the road in the wrong lane of traffic due to the S-curve. When he sees a car coming the other way, he pushes himself back into his lane, according to the driver behind him. The driver coming the other way sees the lights from the motorcycle in the opposite lane, and because there's a fence on the side of the road, moves into the opposite lane of traffic to avoid the motorcycle and slams into him. He's dressed in black and going about 60 miles an hour by this point, and she, heading the other way at 45, never saw him and just destroys him. One of his friends from high school had just gotten a job as an EMT and had to pull his license off of his unrecognizable body and just lost it. The deceased was about 10 minutes from home, so he lost everything in 10 minutes. 1979. Never saw the space shuttle, a personal computer, an Apple computer, iPhone, iPad, iPod, or the internet. All because he was speeding and some kids thought it would be funny to aim the big golf course sprinklers at the road. I mean, yeah, the kids did spray the sprinklers out there, but he was doing 80 and a 45 on a motorcycle at 4 a.m. We can only blame the kids so much. This was reckless behavior, and it sucks that it resulted in this. Story 71. This isn't as bad as the alcohol, the drugs, the self-unaliving stories, but I'm still mad thinking about it. My nerdy friend Brian has ADHD and was always a bit quirky. We've been friends since elementary school, so I know him very well. He calls me his sister. He's an only child. Good guy though, just naive and easily influenced. He finally started dating again after some really horrible relationships and met Katie online. They quickly marry. He proceeded to join some weird ultra-orthodox Christian church cult where they shed all their worldly possessions to be closer to God. His house literally had a table, 2 chairs, a bed, and a Jesus altar. Nothing else, not even carpet, because that was too much of a distraction. After a few years in the cult, they lose their apartment because the cult demanded heavy tithing, so they run out of money. Brian becomes a truck driver, and Katie goes to live with her parents while he trains up. Brian comes home and rents an apartment, finds out that Katie's been faking a job and refuses to move into the new apartment with him. He finds out she's been lying about being married as well and hitting on other men online. They separate. He comes to me for support, and Katie proceeds to turn his immediate family and church against him. She lies and says she's pregnant, which is quickly disproven. Believing her over a doctor, they pressure him back into the marriage. They get counseling. Couple years later, they actually do have a kid. Brian's a successful long-haul truck driver. They left the cult, and he's been collecting the little things that make him happy and that he wants to share with his kids someday. Lord of the Rings swords, Legos, etc. Nothing huge. Brian comes home after a few weeks driving to find Katie has thrown out everything he personally owns. Every single one of his possessions, including school yearbooks and family mementos. Why? Because she didn't like them, and they were collecting dust. Finds out random guys have been coming by the house to take her out. He digs deeper. Turns out she's been lying to people again, saying he's abusive or trying to lure men online, telling them the kid isn't even hers. This time his parents finally side with him when they separate, shut her out of the bank account. Then he comes to visit and gets emotional support from me again. I and a few of his other friends make it well known how supportive we are of his divorce. Katie is upset to have lost his money and her control. She proceeds to call and turn his extended family against him right before he can file for divorce. Extended family pressure his parents into caving, so they proceed to pressure Brian to get back with Katie, whom had been making up sob stories to manipulate his family, that he's cheating on her, more crocodile tears, etc. Against his better judgment and our pleading, he gets back with her again. More counseling, forced to quit social media, where he keeps on contact with his childhood friends and shares his only hobby, photography, whereas she still has an active profile on multiple sites. He loses all his friends because they can no longer take his BS. He's barred from talking to anyone of the opposite gender. His family constantly criticizes him for nearly divorcing her twice and have threatened to disown him if it happens again. He lost his standing in the church, he lost his job, and now he's completely isolated with her manipulations. It's not likely he'll get another chance to leave her, and he won't have anyone to support him if there is a next time. It's really sad. Story 72. This happened around 4 years ago. This guy in my primary school lived next to a girl in his class who had a big end of primary school sleepover. They started poking fun at each other across this fence that they couldn't see each other. Eventually, the girl started throwing rocks and the kid responded and accidentally hit a girl and gave her a tiny gash on her lip. Some of the girls who always disliked the guy enemy went ape-crap and went on the class Snapchat group and demonized him. Long before everyone started bullying this kid, and some threatened to come to his house and beat him up. This kid was introverted, having been abused by a babysitter for months as a small child, and had just started reaching out and trying to make friends. The whole thing was exposed, but nothing was done as the other kids were all popular and well-liked. It broke the kid. Fast forward, and we're now in secondary school, and the kid is 15. He's got no friends and constantly gets teased for being introverted and a bit smart. He hates himself and who he is and lives every day under dark clouds. The kids who did it to him told kids coming into secondary from other schools a skewed version of the events, and as a result, only 10 of the 200 kids in his year even bared to have him around. At home, his parents favor his sporty and athletic siblings and berate him for not exercising enough, not playing sports, spending all his time in his room reading and playing video games, and when he doesn't get above 85 in his school tests, the kid can't do anything about it. Story 73. At my old high school, the seniors get the last week off. Their finals are the previous week and can actually get in trouble. Won't be allowed to walk at graduation if they show up in that week, because the largest reason the seniors used to show up in that week was to disrupt all the other finals going on. Well, one kid decided in the middle of that week that the best thing to do would be get high off his butt and thought it would be amazing to go to school to say bye to his friends and teachers. He ends up crashing into a bunch of cars in the parking lot, and when the faculty came out to check on him, including the nurse and the school police officer, he apparently had so much drugs on him it had to be charged with not just a possession but intent to sell. And just to put icing on the cake for the now 10-year mandatory minimum sentence this carried, because this incident happened on school grounds, he was expelled despite being done with everything. So even though he actually had completed high school, he didn't officially receive his diploma or certificate for ever having done so. Story 74. A guy I went to school with all my life effed up in like a year or two. He was a good kid, but he didn't always fit in. He was teased a lot for being nerdy and things like that. I always tried to be nice to him, so we were friendly. In 8th grade, he wanted to be seen as cool, so he pulled the fire alarm at the school with over 1,000 kids. He even posted on his public Instagram that he was going to do it, and which fire alarm he was going to pull. He got suspended for a while, but since it was his first time doing anything like that, he was allowed to come back for high school. 9th grade, he has a whole new look and tries to be a bad boy. Does drugs, drinks, tries to be edgy by using slurs. He threatened to shoot up our school and immediately got in school suspension for the rest of the year. Mandatory psychiatric help. He's still in my grade, and we graduate next year. I haven't heard from him in forever, but I think he's doing well. He's still hanging around the wrong crowd and still does drugs, but it isn't shooting up the school because you have a death wish bad. All this from the boy I watched pee his pants in 3rd grade. Story 75. My mother and father-in-law had my husband when they were 16 years old. My mother-in-law was immediately motivated to get her life together for her son's sake, worked full-time and studied to become a nurse and support her family. She has become very successful, but while she was still studying, her partner abused some drugs and alcohol and then became very abusive. It ruined their relationship. She ended up having to go into hiding with her son for a good year before they got a divorce. Because of the drug and alcohol abuse, he wasn't allowed to see his son, my husband, and it impeded their relationship, or lack of, ever since. My mother-in-law has since remarried to a wonderful man, has had 2 more children, and is very, very happy. My father-in-law, however, had multiple relationships, non-stuck, but has settled with a woman he's not really in love with, and has 2 more kids who have severe autism. Because of his past mistake with his first son, he wants to do the right thing with his 2 other kids, but you can see he really is struggling. He attempted self-unaliving maybe 5 years back, but obviously still has issues. He calls my husband maybe once a year, drunk, asking for a relationship again, apologizing relentlessly, but never follows through. Just goes to show how 2 people can respond to the same life-changing moment. Story 76. Sadly, I've been watching my father ruin his life for the past year. My family suspected that he had a drinking problem for a while. He would always claim that he was tired from work, but there's a clear difference between someone who is tired and someone who is blackout drunk. Well, last year, while out on a work assignment, he wrecked his rented truck at 5 a.m., blowing right at a .3 BAC. He quickly lost his very lucrative career, but we stood with him, and he got into rehab. He gets out of rehab, and a month later, totals his personal car on a neighbor's mailbox. That's DUI number 2, and he loses the job that hired him after his career job, one that pays much less but was still in his market, and one that would cover my parents' lifestyle. After that, he didn't even care about appearing functional, much less trying to get better. About a year later, my dad is living with his parents, where he is suffering from various medical issues. He quickly got to the point where he was drinking at least a pint of vodka a day and was physically and mentally abusive to everyone in the family. My mom filed for divorce after the 4th stint in a rehab ended with her picking him up from the facility and the facility explaining that they can't help someone that doesn't want help. My wife and I won't see him or allow him to see his grandchild because he tried to physically fight me the last time I was around him. I know it's not as bad as almost all of the stories here, but it sucked to see my dad, someone who I looked up to and thought was a model person, throw everything away in his life just for vodka. Story 77. Wife's stepbrother. Kid never had the best home. Parents divorced. His dad was never around because he loved driving trucks more than he loved being around his kids. Stepbrother had been in trouble when he was a teen. Usual fighting and such. Wasn't really bright, but nice enough kid. Things got really bad in high school when he moved in with his older brother. Just stopped going to school 3 weeks or so from graduation. I know you're thinking he didn't ruin his life in one moment, but just wait. At about 20, he finally realizes that being barely employed without even a GED wasn't going to lead to a successful life, and didn't really impress the ladies. He had gotten a decent job as a welder. I think he was even planning to go for his GED. I don't know all the details because although I will help anyone if they need it, I don't waste time on people who don't want to help themselves. I guess I'm a loser that way. Anyhow, the kid was finally seeming to turn his life around. Except nobody knew he had a growing gambling problem. Finally, one day he blew his entire paycheck on lottery tickets about 4 hours after he got paid. He freaked out because there was no way he could pay his bills. Somehow he got the brilliant idea to rob a liquor store. That one moment ruined everything. He robbed a liquor store wearing a work shirt with his name on it. Now he's awaiting trial for felony robbery. More than likely, he'll never get a good job, and women aren't usually impressed with men who lack prospects. He's 21, and addiction already ruined his life. Story 78. A man currently serving life in prison named Charles Couch decided to take the local police on a high-speed chase to avoid being served a warrant for some non-violent offenses. He took them off US 19 into a neighborhood, at which time the local sheriff commanded Deputy Holt's house, who was in pursuit, to stop the pursuit due to the danger of civilians in the neighborhood. Deputy Holt's house did not stop his pursuit and commanded and chased Charles Couch at 70 miles an hour around a 15 corner in front of the Fire Station Park and Homosassa Trail, a public park where families are out playing every day. Charles Couch slammed headfirst at 70 miles an hour into my wife's parents, traveling 15 miles an hour. Charles Couch got out and ran on a broken hip but was quickly apprehended. Both my in-laws were airlifted to the local hospital. One passed away, the other survives with a broken spine and 24/7 daily help. So on that day, a man with a non-violent warrant took actions that resulted in him spending the rest of his life in jail with no chance of parole. Repeat offender status. A family member murdered and another left maimed. A deputy being investigated and a police department being sued, all because Charles Couch didn't want to face accountability for much lesser crimes. The amount of time this multiple life-ruining moment required to take place was about 3 minutes. Story 79. This happened while I was in high school. Two seniors, we'll call Adam and Eve, were dating and liked messing around but didn't have much of a chance to get handsy till one night the stars aligned. Eve's parents were out of town to attend a convention for a couple days and left Eve home alone to watch the house. One of those nights, Adam's parents decided to have a long date night, so Adam decided he would sneak out in his car after his parents left, breaking curfew, just to go have some fun with Eve. After doing the dirty for a while, Adam starts to get nervous since it's getting close to his curfew. I think it was about 10:30 p.m., and insists on leaving early even though his parents won't be home until midnight. Eve tries to reassure him, but Adam starts panicking when he gets a text from his parents saying they are on their way home. So Adam blows off Eve to leave, but promises to text her when he's home. So Eve lets him go and waits. Eventually, half an hour goes by when Adam lives only 10 to 15 minutes away by car, and Eve gets worried. She gets in her car and starts driving down the street towards a very sharp curve where she saw the EMTs and police. Adam had sped down the residential roads to try and get home quickly, and so fast on that sharp curve that his car flipped over and hit a telephone pole, killing him on the scene. Eve still blames herself for all this and failed out of college and is no longer functioning. Adam's mom was also devastated enough that I heard she resigned because she just couldn't work anymore. Story 80. Many years ago, a friend moved to Las Vegas. Several months after moving, he called me asking for money, not to be bailed out, but as an investment opportunity. He said he would take $5K and turn it into $10K in a week. He explained the details, which I'll explain below. It was sketchy as heck. I turned him down, pleaded with him not to invest anything in this scam. We hung up. He called another friend of ours, who happened to be sitting next to me at the exact moment. He asked him for $5K and gave him the same story and proposition. This friend also told him not to do it. Fast forward a week later, this friend called back saying he was scammed out of $55,000 and was stuck in Atlanta and can't get home. How was he able to raise $55K? Well, he had some cash in the bank and then maxed out all his credit cards on cash advance, borrowed money from other friends, lied to his parents about buying a car but just took their money into the scam. He had to call his parents back and tell them what happened, to then only borrow more money to get back to Vegas, pack his crap, and come back home. He ended up filing for bankruptcy, I think. Apparently, he met a con artist that told him he was going to pick up a large amount of high-end merchandise, clothes, watches, jewelry, etc. Then they were going to turn around and sell it wholesale and double their money. This friend was asked to rent a high-end car for appearances, and they drove from Vegas to Atlanta, got a high-end hotel for appearances, which the friend paid for, and the guy took all the cash, the actual cash, and skipped town. He was told to wait in the hotel for a few hours before calling, so this con artist had a solid few hours head start. Of course, my friend never saw the guy again. From the start, he used a fake name in this orchestrated story with fake people. He spent years trying to find this guy, even went back to Vegas a few times to talk to people who were with this guy when they met. Didn't get anywhere, didn't get his money back, and apparently didn't learn his lesson. About 10 years ago, this same friend was planning to start a business in a third world country in South America because labor was cheap. He said this time he was asked to invest about 15 to 20K. I said again, it was a bad idea, and I disagree with this entire thing. That was the last time I spoke to him. From what I hear, he's back home after that business didn't pan out. Strangely enough. Story 81. Best friend during my high school years went to a different school than me. I went to public schools and he went to the rich kids' private Catholic prep school. His parents were fairly well off. Beer drinking started by our sophomore year in high school. The beer drinking turned to hard liquor by our senior year. He moved off to college to be an engineer like his dad. In college, he became the raging alcoholic frat boy. He discovered drugs in college and turned into an alcoholic stoner frat boy. got absolutely crap-faced plastered one night and broke out multiple windows in his dorm building on campus. So he got kicked out of school and banned from all state colleges and universities. Still an alcoholic, but no longer a frat boy, he discovered harder drugs. Went to work for his dad at the engineering firm, but ended up getting fired by his dad for coming into the office stoned and non-functioning. He got a girl pregnant and ended up marrying her. He gets another job at a local telemarketing place, still an alcoholic stoner and spiraling downward. Wife leaves him, and he discovered even harder drugs. Lost his job, lost his wife, lost his kids, and ended up homeless as a junkie on the streets. Parents paid for rehab, but he always went back to his demon addiction. His mom called me last year to tell me he had passed away. Got a hold of a dirty needle and contracted hepatitis. Still addicted to all the hard drugs and struggling with alcoholism, his organs began shutting down one by one until he died. I went to his funeral, and it was the first time I had laid eyes on him in 10 years. I did not recognize the frail, skinny, weak, homeless man in the box as my old best friend. He had so much and was given the opportunity to be set for life. Private education, paid for college, set up to take over his dad's firm. He had a job, a beautiful wife, and 2 kids, and he threw it all away with an addiction to alcohol and drugs. Story 82. One kid in my school was extremely racist. He was white, but said the most terrible things ever. He acted like he was black and got super upset when someone told him no or denied anything from him. Yes, he would say the N-word constantly. So me and him actually got into an argument at lunch. We were yelling at each other. While I said small curse words like heck or dang, he made it a point to scream every curse word in existence. He even had the audacity to persuade me to unalive myself. His reason was we've been enemies for years and I'm a tomboy, I guess. So he started to scream at me. Then he started to yell the N-word. What he didn't know was the vice principal was approaching him from behind and heard him saying all those awful things. This was the last straw for him, and he was kicked out of the school. He had gotten into so much trouble many times. Literally the entire school was happy about this. He was so racist and cruel, the whole school knew his name. Most of the school started to forget about him, but those who had encounters with him will remember him for a long time. It isn't as extreme as the others, but I felt it would maybe fit under here. He couldn't really go to any other school as he didn't have the money. Story 83. There was a girl in my high school known as the Hot Girl. And for good reason, because she was smoking hot. She was also really sweet, and at parties she would be the wildest one. Well, one night after driving home from a night out, she got into an argument with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend, her friend, and another friend were all bundled in the back seat. The car was actively moving. She got so upset that she decided to jump out of the window. She was sitting on her boyfriend's lap. I don't know what she thought she was doing or what she thought would happen. I assume she thought she would jump out and roll somewhere. What ended up happening was she jumped out, got swept under the car, and got trampled by the back tires. The car stops and everyone gets out to see her, and she was slowly dying. The female dog driver was scared because she was speeding and they were all underage and drunk, so she left the scene. The rest of her friends stayed with her until the very end. The incident happened in front of a Shell gas station directly across from the entrance of my high school. I remember getting a call the morning after one of my friends in the vehicle, and I couldn't believe it. The life of the party was gone, and my other friend killed her and left her to die. It's always the people you least expect. She was only 15 years old. Story 84. An old friend of mine for 20 plus years got addicted to hash a while back. He started using way too much money on it, stopped paying bills and rent to buy more hash. Some of his friends that hung out at his place all the time only came over to smoke my friend's stuff, were never there when he was out of hash and never pitched in. So he was also supplying his stoner bum friends. He ended up getting kicked out of school because he was always high and either didn't show up or didn't do his schoolwork. He was on his way to becoming a social worker, something he wanted for a long time because he loved helping people. He started getting a form of credit with his dealers, people you don't want to miss payments with, so was basically loaning money from drug dealers on top of loaning from friends. The bill collectors and the dealers soon started coming for their money. If he had just stopped buying so much hash, he would have been able to pay his stuff off since he had a decent part-time job. He got desperate for money and had a very bad idea. To add some background info, we had an acquaintance who had been in and out of prison for a lot of small stuff, small sentences, and was a known crook. This guy, I'll call him Joe, started extorting people for money. He would threaten people with violence to get them to pay him money to leave them alone. Joe was good at finding weak people with a lot of money who were usually too scared to do anything, neither standing up to Joe or calling the police, until he took it too far. He was extorting this poor guy that had eventually given him all his savings to stay safe, but he ran out of money to pay. Joe, so out of fear for his well-being, he contacted the police, who started an investigation. The police quickly gathered evidence on at least 3 people Joe was extorting who were willing to work with them. They started surveillance and put microphones in the scared guy's apartment to get Joe on tape threatening the guy. Well, Joe was also an idiot and would brag about how easy he was getting money from these people, and he told my friend about it, which gave him the very bad idea. My friend knew the guy who had given all his savings to Joe. I think they'd gone to middle school together or something, and decided to get some money to help him pay off his mounting debt. So he went over to the guy's apartment and threatened him. Told him Joe had sent him to collect, and if he didn't pay, Joe was coming for him. This was all recorded, on tape, and upgraded the crime to something a lot more serious, since it looked like Joe was now sending people to do his dirty work. I don't remember what the actual charges were, but it had something to do with organizing crime and gang stuff. My friend didn't even get any money out of it, but was soon after charged with a serious crime. The cops showed up a couple of days after and arrested my friend at his apartment. He made Joe's case a lot worse too, so Joe got thrown in prison for a few years. My friend ended up doing 6 to 9 months. He lost his job and his apartment, plus everything he owned in the apartment, his TV, PS3, clothes, furniture, everything. My friend never recovered from it. After he got out, 7+ years ago, he couldn't keep a job or an apartment. Ended up sofa surfing, tried moving to another city to start over, ended up homeless again, kept getting thrown out of apartments for not paying rent, got into huge fights with his family, and he cut ties with them for not giving him monetary handouts. He was still addicted. He started to take advantage of all of his friends, taking as much as he could from them, overstaying his welcome, constantly asking for handouts, even stealing, until they got fed up. Then he would act offended and cut ties with them. He would stay in shelters, but would often get thrown out for inappropriate behavior. He ended up moving back to my area, but traded his addiction for alcoholism. I've constantly kept in touch all this time and have tried to help him all I could, but at the same point he became self-destructive and wouldn't listen to reason, and has been at rock bottom for some time. I see him around once or twice a week, always drunk, dirty AF, looking real unhealthy. He's gained a bad reputation, has been thrown out of stores and restaurants for bad behavior. He seems like he has just accepted his situation and has no ambition or plans to change his life. I feel bad, but he won't accept help besides cash and feel helpless to do anything. He went from starting school to being arrested in less than a year. Story 85. I had a friend at university. I lived with him. He failed the first year as he had a gaming addiction. His life revolved around COD. At the end of his first year, he smashed his Xbox and vowed never again. His aunt and uncle worried about his behavior and asked me to contact them if I had any worries. In second year, he decided to study a new subject, and the first couple weeks went by like normal student life. I bought a PS4, and he decided to do the same. My housemates and I warned him against it, but he got very angry and upset and defensive, telling us we're not his parents. His mother was institutionalized by psychiatric hospitals, and his father wanted nothing to do with her or him. At that point, we felt bad for him, so we let him continue. But the PS4 turned into a gaming laptop, a streaming setup, a mic, etc. He spent all his money on this setup. He stopped going to university. I called his aunt and uncle, and they were afraid this might happen. They came to see him, and he cursed at them and kicked them out of the house and wouldn't speak to any of us for literally weeks. He would sleep all day and only leave his room between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. to use the toilet. During this time, he was clearly malodorous. He was not washing, was not going to university. He had been to one lecture at the beginning of the year. I remember clearly seeing him one day in the kitchen, and he was eating a tin of baked beans. I asked him about things, and he said he was fine. He was not fine. Turns out he was only eating 1 tin of beans per day as he had no money and was afraid of getting fat and wanted to have a slim figure for the ladies. End of year rolls around. He's terrified. He hasn't revised or learned anything. He scrambles to try and learn a module, but ultimately decided to sleep through all his exams. When the year ended, he went home to his aunt and uncle. After checking PlayStation Online, he stopped signing back in after he moved back. I saw a picture of him recently. He is skeletal, like proper Christian Bale machinist. He hasn't spoke to anyone or us since he left. That was 5 years ago, and as far as I can tell from Facebook, he isn't doing well at all. Story 86. A girl I semi-dated for about a month. It wasn't a serious dating relationship, maybe 5 to 6 group and single hangouts over a month period. She became tangentially associated with my friend group, and that is how we originally met. She was mid-20, about 3 years out of a divorce, and had 2 kids, 7 and 9. When we met, she was in a pretty stable spot. Good job, been in stable housing for about 1.5 years, consistent on working out and keeping up with herself, was about 3 semesters from getting her undergraduate degree. No previous history of anything seriously bad that I could sense. I was kind of impressed how much this girl had it together. She seemed to fit in well with my group of friends because everyone had jobs, financial stability, etc. Since she was married and had kids young, she didn't have much social life in her early adult years and early 20s. She was now starting to meet people and she was going more than she had before. I guess she didn't know how to stop. We would hang out for a few hours, whether it was on a weekend or weekday, and she would go out with some group of her friends nearly every time afterwards. She seriously went from 0 to 100 so fast I was kind of taken aback. I was already leaning towards ending it with her when she went out on a Friday night, got hammered, and called and asked me to pick her and her friends up from the club. No problem, I took them home and then took her home. 2 hours later, when I wake up to a snap of her drinking Bloody Marys with another group of friends. She literally got dropped off and then immediately went out again. The next week, she went on a trip to Mexico with another group. It kind of gave me a window to stop interacting with her at this point. Nothing bad personality-wise, just wasn't my scene to be going out that much. About a week after she gets back, my friend that was the coworker of hers says that she's been laid off because she didn't let them know she would be gone for a week. A couple weeks later, she calls me asking for money because she can't pay rent. I helped her out, but asked my friends to chip in so it looks like it's help from friends thing and not me individually financially supporting her. A few days after that, she calls asking for more money. I decline. About a month later, she calls. I'm a lawyer for context here, and says CPS is investigating her and that her ex is now seeking custody of her kids. I give her some names for referrals and leave it. A few months later, I get a call from CPS asking if I could submit to a paternity test. Apparently, she, a few months ago, got pregnant and has named me as a potential father of this child. I politely decline, as I never slept with her, thank God. That was my last personal interaction with her circumstances, but just from courtroom chatter, I understand she did lose custody of her kids, has some drug baby daddy, and is struggling with employment, housing, and suspected drug use. It was sad. She was well on her way to doing great things, but she couldn't adjust to having a social life. You hear that, introverts? Let's all just keep doing our thing, man, lest we become this woman. Story 87. A guy in our town was driving home one lunchtime near Christmas a couple of years back. Weather was dreadful, visibility was awful. He overtook a string of cars on the wrong side of the road at speeds well over 100 miles an hour. He pulled back in too early, clipping the back of a small car being driven by an 8.5-month pregnant school teacher. He was driving a Porsche Cayenne. The impact was such that she was thrown into the middle of the road. Paramedics were there almost immediately because they were on their way to another call very nearby. They couldn't save her, so they performed an emergency C-section on the road but couldn't save her son either. Absolutely devastating and completely avoidable. The driver from my town lost an arm at the scene and was airlifted to the hospital. His family made the decision to turn off his life support when it became clear he was unlikely to make any kind of recovery. He was a successful, wealthy man, apparently with a happy marriage and 3 adult kids who adored him, and grandchildren who thought he was the best thing since sliced bread. He ruined all of their lives that day, as well as obviously that of the family, friends, and students of the teacher who just looked like one of life's shining lights in the photos in the papers. There is dash cam footage linked below of him overtaking the other vehicles, but not the crash itself. It's appalling. Such a selfish crap. In a hurry, thought he knew best and was a great driver. He was clearly loved by his family, but he essentially drove a tank into an ordinary car at crazy speed. In some ways, I wish he'd survived so he could have been punished. The double white lines in the middle of the road mean overtaking is prohibited. He ignored those, as well as the speed limit. Story 88. Drugs. I might be spelling it wrong, but that stuff is worse than PCP stuff from what I've seen. Davey was convinced he was Jesus. He had such a psychotic break, he was convinced the doctors cut his wings off and gave him drugs to suck out his holiness. His girlfriend, who was pregnant, got an abortion. He thought she murdered the next Messiah. This all happened in 3 months. He was a caring, great person, loved soccer. Additionally, no blame to the people I've lost, lack of mental health care. The man that drove me 2 hours to the reputable hospital while I was in labor was a diagnosed schizophrenic, multiple personality disorder. He tried applying for disability to help cover the meds he needed to stay stable. Denied. He ended up turning to research psychedelic drugs to stop the voices so he could work his full-time job. He overdosed a month before he was going to start university for engineering and design. He was so talented and kind. I've lost so many people through the cracks, it's just a terrible system. Again, I don't hold this against him. I'm a recovering addict. Been clean for, I think, like 6 years now. I know my start date, but I stopped keeping track. I don't crave it when I'm scared or stressed anymore. So to summarize my comments, drugs. Story 89. I didn't see it, but I know one of my classmates when I was in high school, once entering their first year into college, got into a terrible car accident on their own. The driver was drunk and high, and so were most of the other passengers. They had the accident. I don't remember how it occurred. And there was one dead, one girl severely disfigured for life, and the driver is currently in a coma. So when he wakes up, if he does one day, he'll have to deal with being the indirect cause of death of one of his friends. Will probably have to be sentenced for unintentional homicide along with dealing with PTSD and having to recover from the years lost into a coma. Well, that concludes our horrifying, sad, tragic tales of people spiraling uncontrollably into madness and sadness. Guys, let these stories serve as a warning to A, don't do drugs, and 2, whoever you end up marrying in this life, make sure you pick a good one, because there's a lot of these stories where the spouse is screwing over the other one. There's probably a third other good point here, but it's slipping me right now. If you guys have any sad or fun tragic stories that you want to share as well, feel free to drop them down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.